Welcome to the Republican Professor. This afternoon, we have a very special guest. Do we ever have non-special guests? Maybe just when it's just me. We have Dr. Errin Clark joining us. Welcome, Errin.
I'm very happy to be here, Lucas. Dr. Lucas Mather. It's great to see you again. It's been, what, 15 years? Has it been 15 years? I don't know.
Has it been that long? Good grief.
It's been a long time.
I love that I'm talking to Dr. Errin Clark right now. It's been a long time. We had epistemology together. We had metaphysics, probably philosophy of mind. And then you went on and got a Ph.D. in philosophy from the University of St. Louis.
That's right. There were lots of streets there.
Which I've always thought is a strange name for a, I thought it was a strange name for a university.
Lots of jaywalkers.
I bet. I made a comment about it one time, and the person said it's a Catholic school, as if that explained it.
It is the first Jesuit university on the western side of the Mississippi, I believe.
Yeah.
First.
No, it doesn't surprise me. All right, so you went to you're Jesuit trained, but you before that you were in South America. I mean, you're like a man for all seasons. You're like a James Bond.
There's only 2 seasons in South America, but they're very different. I lived in the Amazon region, which has 90-degree winters, and I was constantly wet.
Oh my gosh.
Even after I dried myself, I was wet within a second.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And I met my wife there.
Oh, that's awesome.
I got married in Brazil. That was interesting. By a judge. They do it a little differently. They want it very civil. All marriages should be civil, right? No, they want you to be married by a judge, and then they put your name in a paper to make sure you're not married to somebody else. So if you want a religious wedding, that has to be done on your own accord, but they want you in front of a judge of the state. So that was
interesting.
Kind of interesting.
And are you under oath when you take your vow then?
Yes, you have to sign things, and the judge is in a robe, and
so you could actually commit a crime when you're
yeah, you can. And that's why they
perjure yourself. Oh wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't perjure myself.
Now, was your wife the same age as you, or?
No, she's 4 years younger than I am.
How old were you when you got married?
Let's see, this was 2006.
19?
I don't think about my age very often. I forget how old I am. Let's see. So I must have been 31 when I got married.
So she was about 26. She was going into her late 20s. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. She was going to turn 27 because we were married on the 30th of June, and her birthday is July 31st. So she was going to be 27.
And you guys are still married today?
We're married, and we have 6 kids, and this is the quietest my house has been in a very long time.
Praise God.
Yeah, it's surreal. I'm enjoying it.
I'm sorry to spoil it for you.
No, it's nice to.
I see a Bible behind you. I see books. I think looks like a monk or something, the statue of a monk.
Yeah, I don't know what that guy is. I found him at Goodwill, but I like
street.
He had a hood, and he was reading and probably chanting.
Is that Street Lewis?
Is
the guy? Is that the guy that?
No. Oh no, who is that? That guy? I think that's Saint Anthony of Padua, one of the Desert Fathers.
Oh, is that who Padua is named after? The university in Italy?
That's a good question.
Well, actually, no, that doesn't make.
It might be just named after the city.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense because that implies the place exists. Well, we're being boring to some people, but you know what? There are a select group of people that are not bored right now listening to this because they know us, or they're just.
You can't talk to Lucas without banter. You can't talk to Mr. Mather, Dr. Mather, without banter.
They hear that you got a PhD in philosophy, and they're wondering, okay, there's going to be something that's some value bomb that's dropped here. So, and I guarantee you there's lots. You've been teaching philosophy for a long time. How many years have you been teaching?
I taught a little bit. Doug Guyvett let me teach a couple of his classes, or a week of his classes. That was my first. I kind of shoved me into teaching, and that was I think an advanced epistemology class, and I loved it. And then when I at St. Louis University, I also went to St. Louis University, not just Street Louis, but St. Louis University. They had me teach.
Yeah, some people say it that way.
That's right.
I call my doctor drive.
It makes perfect sense. Street and drive.
I don't get that.
So they have you teach there, and I entered the program in 2009 and started teaching 2010. That was part of the deal. If they pay your tuition, you teach there, and I loved it, and I still love teaching. And it was I had good experiences seeing. I felt like, and I'm sure you've experienced this, probably every classroom. And you're very effective at this, but I saw just saying little things that should be obvious, and it's like an atomic bomb goes off in the class, and nobody says anything, and they're just staring. And I learned that can happen, and it's very effective and good. That I remember that probably happened at the third or fourth class session of my first class.
You're not talking about the Doug Guyvett epistemology classes at this
point.
No,
this is at St. Louis University. This is at St. Louis University. I think the thought was that not all religions can be true because they contradict each other, and that it seemed like that had not occurred to many people, or they just never really had thought about that. But I just remember like the blank stares, and they're going, and I remember hearing something like, "Oh, yeah," or something like that. And I thought, this is for me. I got to keep doing this.
How can you not do it when, well, the pay is really bad, but when you have that kind of sociological fact in front of you, how can you not do it? It's like somebody else is going to do it, and they're going to apparently they're already screwing it up.
And you know what? When that happens, there's gratitude. And I'm sure you've experienced this too. They thank me after. I mean, probably the best comments I get after my classes are things like, I've never thought that way before. I've never seen the world that way before. And that's a really good feeling that that someone has taken it seriously and expanded the way and revised the way that they've seen the world.
What was the name of that class? Do you remember?
It was just an intro to philosophy class. And I think we were discussing Xenophonies, the pre-Socratic Xenophonies, because he criticized the Greek religious beliefs. He said that the Greek gods couldn't really be God because they lie and cheat and do stuff like that. And my students took offense at that, almost, that someone would criticize somebody else's religion. Wow. And then I just asked them questions like, well, can all religions be true?
Right.
And we got to the idea that they contradict, and then they just stopped and thought about it. And there was silence for a few seconds.
Do they not know what a contradiction is?
That's a good question. I think they did. Maybe I had to illustrate, or I think I had to illustrate, but they understood. I mean, that's a fundamental. We can't think without employing the notion of contradiction, right? I
agree. It does help to be able to define it.
It does, yeah.
And to do it on the fly with no notes, as if it's second nature. And I don't think that many people, at least that I teach, can do that. They do need some training on that. At least that's my experience. And in my experience of being mentored in high school, I was mentored by Dr. Gordon R. Lewis, who taught philosophy and theology at Denver Seminary for 40 years, Ph.D. in philosophy from Syracuse. And I met with him once a week my senior year of high school, along with my friend Robbie Blanks, who I was fortunate enough to have on this podcast came on. He's a missionary in Africa now, teaches philosophy in Africa.
Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's he's based in Pennsylvania, but lots of experience in Africa. Anyway, Gordon Lewis spent a lot of time making sure that we could define terms that we're using. And I remember he really drilled in what the definition of a contradiction was. And he was like, affirming the same thing at the same time and in the same sense. Affirming and denying the same thing at the same time and in the same
time
sense.
and in the same. Yep, that's right.
In the same respect.
And do you find that when you define it and you explain it or give an example, they see it right away. They know what that is, and they know
that's right. It needs no other further explanation or proof that it's bad. You can't think without it. You can't communicate without it.
That's right.
I mean, think about just the scheduling for our time together. If I would have said, I'd like to meet at 4:00 p.m. on June 9th. But at the same time, I'd also not like to meet that time. Let's not do it at that time. And I mean the same thing by those words.
It's a good example, and those sorts of examples are really helpful. So I give one like that. I say, suppose you go to a doctor and you're sick and you need to receive some sort of treatment, and the doctor says, you need to take this red pill in the morning, and also you need to not take this red pill in the morning. Right? I mean, what would you think?
Just to be
you would think the doctor's joking with you, or
and also
there's something wrong?
Right. Yeah.
Or you wouldn't get on
something wrong with them.
You wouldn't want to get on an airplane with a mechanic who thought like that.
Right.
So the airplane is safe. Obvious. Right.
But what I mean by safe is not safe.
In more, cases so familiar and so numerous that we can't count them all or think of them all. But for some reason, when it comes to things like morality and religion, it's like completely off the table. And to say that something is true, and that two things that one which denies the other in the same sense can be true, and to say that that's the problem, either makes people angry or throws them into a confusion. It's amazing. And
how does for someone who's listening to this in the future, how does Christianity contradict Hinduism? Just take that for example.
Well, for one thing, and I'd say one of the most important ways is that in Hinduism, the supreme being is not personal, doesn't know and love. Secondly, that in Hinduism, the supreme being is not a creator. They are what are called pantheists, pan meaning all, everything is God. So at least in some forms of Hinduism. Now in Hinduism, you have different kinds. There are polytheistic kinds of Hinduism, but meaning many gods, but those many gods are often understood as manifestations of the supreme being called Brahman.
So Christianity and Hinduism can't be the same thing ultimately, because Christianity, because the contradiction is God can't be personal and not personal at the same time and in the same respect. Christianity says God is personal. In fact, God is tripersonal.
That's
because of the Trinity. And creator, right? God can't be creator of the world and not creator of the world at the same time and in the same respect.
That's right.
And I can see how, if you're an American student and you've never really thought deeply beyond bumper stickers of coexist or whatever, that would be like mind blowing. Mind blown.
It's
so
really
basic though.
It is. And it's amazing to me. There's something that I've come to call the despair of truth. And it's what we're talking about. This idea, I call it a despair, not because people feel bad about it, and quite the contrary, they feel very good about it. It's a sanguine, they're very sanguine about the idea that there's no truth. And I've run into this a lot. And I'll just give an example. So I taught world religions. And at the end of the course, I'll even let them do an anonymous survey. Is there such a thing as a true religion? And not one of them says there is. They'll say, I'm a Catholic, or I'm an evangelical, or I'm a Buddhist. I've had every religion, all of the religions named in the survey, but they say there's not a true religion.
Yeah.
Now that's, maybe they think you just can't know, but what they're using the language of truth.
Right.
And that's another problem. I think I'm sure you've run into this before. There's a confusion between saying something is real and saying that we can know it. Right. They will. I remember having at St. Louis University, having a conversation with a student saying that, well, we can't know that whether there's a God, so there isn't a God. That was her inference. Right.
Right.
So there are these basic concepts that we use: contradiction, truth, knowledge. So basic, we can't, as you said, we can't communicate without using them, right, without employing them. Yeah. And so they know it. They know the concepts because they use it all the time. But somehow, when it gets to morality and religion, the concepts are out the window. And they'll say things like my reality and my truth.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And
it is interesting.
I wonder, is there a sort of shame? Is there a fear
I think so.
Of saying out in the open, but even to themselves now there could be lots of different motives, but I just wonder what the motives are. There seems to be, at least publicly, a kind of embarrassment or a desire to avoid any sort of conflict. But then those who internalize this confusion, what is the motive there? Is it just becomes such an ingrained habit?
I think that's it.
That they can't, they've told themselves over and over again.
It's a bad habit. I think it's a bad habit.
It's a really bad habit.
It's probably mixed in with some fear and some desire to get along, to be a part of whatever social group they think they're being a part of. The pressure to conform is quite high for people. Academics fall prey to this just like everybody else.
It's true.
And I think you can explain a lot of the problems on campus just by pointing that out, that there's a tremendous pressure to conform. And if it's really bad, there's tremendous pressure to pretend it's not bad. What I do that gets through to them is I say, well, if there's no truth about that, there's no truth about what an A looks like on paper. I spell it like this, it looks like a D. And that's what I mean by that is an A. And I think you got an A on it.
Yeah.
And they'll say, no, that's not, that's a D. That's right. And I say, you're telling me that
somewhere
can't be an A and not an A at the same time? Is that what you're saying? You all of a sudden discover the basic truth again, and then I reassure them that no, it really is an A. Right. That's how I pronounce that letter, and that's how I draw it. That's my truth.
But no, it's not the truth.
Oh, so there's the truth again. Okay, now, great, wonderful. Welcome back. You would have gotten an A, a real one, if you would have just let that sink in. Just be comfortable. Start getting comfortable with that. Why do you only get comfortable with that when you personally feel threatened? I mean, not everything revolves around you.
Yeah.
It's kind of narcissistic, actually.
Do you think that there is a kind of, I don't know if I would say empiricism, or an overemphasis on the senses and not reason? I'm sure that's there, but I'm wondering if that is part of this. Like, as soon as you're talking about morality, you can't quantify it, or you can't point to it.
Well, they don't quantify things anyway. I mean, the closest that they come to quantifying things is when they're filling up their gas tank and they're having a heart attack when they see the digital number increasing to the extent that it is. But even then, they still can't quantify, they still can't make the connections with who was voted in to office and whether the professor warned them of this or not without someone reminding of them. So I think there's a key role that you're playing in the classroom, and that is to remind them of what they already know.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah, I find myself mostly doing that. Using familiar examples, things that everybody can, things from family. I often talk about my kids, but talk about the students in the context of their families and normal things that they would have growing up. And I think that's, they see the topics that we're talking about in that context, and they're ready to affirm it like that. They're ready to say, yes, that's a basic, I couldn't think otherwise, right? But when it gets to morality and religion in particular, often the thing I hear is, well, so many people disagree. So there's this idea that if you disagree, that somehow implies that you can't know it or you can't reason about it.
Yeah, but they don't really believe that. And the reason I know that is because if I just asked them a thought experiment, and you do the same thing, I'm sure. If everybody happened to agree, besides you, that enslaving you would be the best thing for our public safety, would that make it the right thing? Is that enough to make slavery right?
Right. And of course, they would say no.
No, that's not what makes it right. It's not agreement that makes something right or wrong. And they know that.
They do know that.
They just need to be, that's what I'm saying is, I never saw, before I started teaching, I never knew that so much of my work would be, our work would be reminding people of what they already know and just holding their feet to the, no, don't lose the thought. Keep thinking about it. You need to have this habit in your mind.
Yeah. And it's amazing it's amazing to me how much we need to do that.
It is amazing.
Okay, I guess,
Errin, let's tell some people about you. I mean, we've already gotten the sense that you're are you bilingual?
I'm almost trilingual, perhaps quadrilingual. I don't know.
Are you still working on English? Which one?
That's the one I need the most help with. I speak Portuguese almost fluently. Probably my wife would cut me down to size a little bit if she heard me say that, but she's not here. I speak a little bit of Spanish. I used to speak Spanish better, but then I learned Portuguese, and it's so close in some ways that my Spanish just turns into Portuguese when I try to speak it. And then funny. I can read some Latin. I can read Thomas Aquinas's Latin and the Vulgate.
Wow.
And when I try to read Augustine's Latin, I feel scared, lost, but I just need to practice. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's it. I can say thank you in a bunch of different languages. I think that's probably a good word to know in many languages.
And so where do you live now? Do you still
I live in Ohio, near Cincinnati, a little bit above Cincinnati, and I like it here a lot. I did live in Wisconsin. What do you like about it? Well, I just like the atmosphere. I like, I feel like I'm free to do good things, like breathe without something over my face.
You're free to
and
do
I know
things. Wow.
Yeah. and protect my family and things like that. And people are very friendly and like to be helpful around here. I remember when I moved to LA, I mean, it was a stupid idea, but I tried to make cookies for my neighbor when I moved down to go to Biola. And the cookies weren't good, but I don't think they even knew that because they probably didn't try them. But it was very unfriendly where I was. And here it's very different. I'm not saying everybody in California is like that, of course.
Yeah.
That was my experience in LA. There was kind of a, like, why do you even want to talk to me? So, sort of thing in the neighborhood. And here, my neighbors always giving my kids candy, and people are, it was like that in St. Louis when I lived in St. Louis too. There would be block parties and stuff. I suppose it depends on the neighborhood, but we live in a very kind of free, happy, people want to just do their own thing and help other people if they can, sort of neighborhood, I guess, or region of the state. So I would like to stay here.
Wow. That's a high compliment for that area.
Yeah.
What's the town called?
It's called Loveland, but it's Loveland, Ohio. It's about 15 minutes north of Cincinnati.
Oh.
So Cincinnati kind of dips down and the Ohio River dips up. And then I'm about 20 minutes away from Kentucky.
Oh, wow.
And I'm teaching at Northern Kentucky University right now, online. Enrollment's just tanked in the last couple semesters. So I'm
it's the river. Is it
work.
the river that separates Kentucky from Ohio?
Here,
Remind me.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right. The Ohio River. That's right.
I've read books, fiction about it. Like, Louis L'Amour wrote a book called How the West Was Won, and I think it's a lot of it takes place right around there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful too. It's very hilly, very green, lush during the summer. The winters aren't too bad. I lived up in Wisconsin, and it snowed at the end of May. And my wife, who's from the Amazon region, was begging me to get out of Wisconsin.
Why do people live in Wisconsin then?
I don't know. They
What's good about it? What do they like about it?
Like, I don't know.
Is it cheap to live there?
It was friendly. It doesn't seem very different than where I live now. Maybe it's a little bit more expensive.
Are people nicer?
People are nice there. I made some very good friendships there. People are very nice where I was.
Where were you teaching up there?
I was actually a headmaster at a Catholic high school for a year. And then I went back into higher ed. I like teaching higher ed, although the students I had, the high school students I taught them philosophy and theology. They loved it. And they were very sharp too. I would say if I would compare, I was a little bit surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but they were sharper than most of my college students. They were just ready. I don't know if it was an attitude. I think it was part of it was an attitude of just openness to learning something.
They were
without
curious.
any pragmatic, they're there. It's not like they're trying to get, they're there because they have to be there, but they're also, they're not just trying to get a grade to get a degree. They're in this sort of,
you're talking about the high school kids
where they're starting to just ask serious questions, and they just seemed like sponges. It was amazing.
High school kids?
High school, yeah, freshmen. Almost all of them were freshmen.
Wow.
And they were sharp. But I went, and then I taught at Concordia. I could still teach there online, but Concordia University, Wisconsin. Angus Manouge is the chair there, and he wrote yeah,
I've heard of that name. I don't know him.
He wrote a review of my first publication, a chapter in a book by Scott Smith. You remember Scott Smith?
Sure.
Of course. Naturalism and Our Knowledge of Reality. And so he happened to be in Wisconsin. And so when I left my headmastership, I started teaching there because we kind of had a rapport already. And that was good. And then I moved here a couple years ago, mainly to get my children to a school that I thought would be good for them.
You knew of the school before you moved?
I knew of the school, yeah. And
Wow. What's the school? Do you mind saying?
It's a parish school. There's a parish here, Immaculate Conception Church, and they just had Immaculate Conception Academy. But I had a rapport with this priest there. But we came down here to do that, and I was going to do some online stuff for them, and it fell through. My life has been kind of a series of good things professionally are starting to happen, and then they just fall through. And I've learned and I'm going to just speak frankly, it's been painful.
Please do.
There have times been acutely painful, seriously painful, existentially painful.
Amen.
And I'm really glad this has happened, because I don't think I'd be the person I am today if I didn't have all these constant disappointments. Because that might sound funny, but I've really learned that, to get just a different perspective on this life, that what really counts, and there are other things that are going on that I feel free to speak about. My wife has been seriously ill for the entirety of our marriage, so sick that she spent months at a time in a hospital, and then even had to spend an entire summer in her country. So I was basically a single parent. I've been a single parent just for that reason, not because there was marital problems or anything like that. So just lots of those sorts of difficulties. And I mean, there have been times we've been just hanging by a string financially. Something always comes through. But my point in saying all of this is that it's helped me see what kind of person I want to be, and try and been in a way easier to become that kind of person, because what really counts to me is my family and being creating an atmosphere with my wife and my children where we're growing in virtue and holiness. And I see it in my children, and I can't be thankful enough to see my children being wise beyond their years, in comparison to many children that I see. And I'm not boasting. I mean, I pray for them all the time. And I pray for myself, because I make mistake after mistake.
Even if you were boasting, it would be perfectly understandable.
My children, they're so good-hearted. They love purity. They love modesty. They love wisdom. And sometimes they say things that they teach me a lot. They'll say things, we'll be talking about something like philosophical or theological, and they'll say things that, I never even thought of that. And it clarifies, my own thinking. And
what are their ages?
I don't think that it would be, I don't think we would have this atmosphere if we didn't need to pull together all the time and pray together all the time and talk together all the time. If I was out, so.
What are their ages?
So I have two girls, 13, she's going to be 14 here in August. And then one's going to turn 12 next week, I think. No, in a couple of weeks. Then I have a son, 8, another son, 7, a daughter, 5 now, and a son, 3. And we just discovered he's autistic. He's really interesting. He gets up in the middle of the night and likes to open the freezer doors and pretend he's sneezing, and all sorts of interesting things, like jumping into the bathtub without getting his clothes off. And he's added a lot of color to our household.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't.
I'm sorry if you don't mind me getting personal. It's just what the thing. It's something that's always on my mind. I marvel at the things that have transpired. My goals in getting a Ph.D. in philosophy, and the things that have happened since then. I'm to the point where I have to look for other work. I have to get out of academia. I just can't sustain. I can't support my family. But I want to teach. So I'm glad that I have my feet in different institutions teaching online, because I can still do that. But right now I'm just looking outside of academia for stable work. I hope it's okay that I just all of a sudden get personal.
Well, we'll edit most of it out. Probably we'll edit it. It'll just basically be me and you saying hi, And then at the end, we'll be like, well, great to hear from you. And there'll be some stuff in the middle about you having a gun somewhere that we missed.
Well,
But,
that's important. At least we should keep that.
Do you have a gun?
I have 4 guns. I just wanted I wanted a variety. I do. I started, I've been, ever since I was 20. I must have been 16. I didn't grow up with guns, but I went skeet shooting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you grow up with them? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in California. I was born in Colorado, lived there till I was 5, up in the Rockies, up in Fort Collins. You know where Fort Collins is.
I do. I'm a Colorado boy.
Right. I thought so.
And where did you grow up in California?
In Santa Cruz County.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
In a small beach town called Aptos. Yeah. So I was always out in the forest as a kid. But I didn't grow up, my parents didn't own guns. We didn't even speak about it. I didn't really even think about it except for the toy guns that I had maybe. Oh. But I was 16 and I went, my friend had a 12 gauge and we went and shot clay pigeons and I loved it. Sweet. And I thought myself, I want to get a gun. And someday I want to get a gun. But then after I got married, so I didn't get a gun until after I got married. Then I was thinking about
a long time to wait.
And it was a long time to wait. I just never, it's one of those things, there's lots of things that stay in the back of my mind. And then there's an event that makes me think of it. And I think I better do this now. In any case, once I had a family and we were living in the city in Milwaukee, I thought I should have protection from my family. So I got a handgun. And then I thought, well, a shotgun's, before I got the handgun, someone from the school I was a headmaster at, they liked me a lot. Mm-hmm. And they just out of the blue got me a 12 gauge.
Praise God.
And gave one to me. So I had that, but I wanted a handgun also.
Democrats want to make that a crime. What you just said, it's not a crime, but they want to make it a crime. What you just said.
To have a shotgun and a handgun?
No, well, they probably would want to make that a crime too, but that's hard to prove. The transfer of the weapon from one person to another.
Yeah.
In terms of a gift.
Right. Yeah.
And that's very common. It's been common throughout American history and our proud heritage of firearm ownership. And Democrats are intent on criminalizing innocent conduct and under the guise of public safety.
Well, they're going to have to go little by little like that, like little things like transfer.
Yeah, that's what they do. It's a crime now to do that in California.
Okay. Yeah. This was in Wisconsin.
In fact, it's a crime to loan your gun to somebody else without going through a background check and having somebody hold it for 10 days. I mean, it used to be that, you could borrow somebody's gun to go hunting. It was not a big deal.
Right.
Not a big deal at all. And Democrats want to get the administrative state and the police into everything. They want to bureaucratize everything. They want to make everything expensive. Of course, it costs money to loan a gun to somebody else. It costs money because somebody has to pay for that. And it's amazing. So anyway, when you're saying this, part of the work we're doing on the podcast is to just describe how ridiculous it is. I mean, you can either see it's ridiculous right away, or if you can't. If you can't, then probably you've been intellectually molested by Democrats since you were like 5, and you've never had any healing. There's never been any intellectual healing or moral healing or spiritual healing. It's like the kids that we have that don't know what a contradiction. They do know what a contradiction is, but they don't. They've never had something.
It's not intellectually acceptable to speak like that or think about it.
Yeah. So what kind of 12 gauge did you get? Was it used?
It was a Remington. A Remington's 870. That's right.
Is it a hunting one or is it a self-defense one?
Well, I wanted it for self-defense. He gave it to me and I thought this will be my home defense.
What color is it?
It's all black.
Okay, yeah. That's a self-defense one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can use a hunting one for
And it's a
self-defense.
pump.
Yeah.
It's Remington 870. And then I wanted to teach my children how to shoot.
Praise God.
So I got a 22.
Oh,
And they
I
a
love
little
22s.
A little Smith was no Ruger. There's a Ruger 22.
It's a rifle.
Semi-automatic, yeah.
Yeah.
And they love it.
Awesome.
So there's a range right now down the street. And my second daughter, she loved it. She would
How
always
cool
want
is
to go
that?
shoot.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that's awesome.
And then I got another one just because I wanted it.
Is it a 10-22?
It's a
Ruger 10?
10-22.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I got that. I got that for mainly for my children, but I like it too. It's a lot of fun. And then I took my wife on a date to the range, and I didn't have the 22, or maybe I didn't bring it with me. So I have a 9mm. So she shot that, and it scared her. So she said, let's start me with
the 22.
Yeah. She just didn't expect the recoil. She loved it. She said, I love it, but I need to start a little bit lower.
What kind of 9mm do you have?
It's
I have to ask this.
43X.
A Glock. Okay, so it's a small one.
Yeah, I don't know if it's called well, there's compact.
That's for concealed carry.
And there's semi-compact. It's a 43X.
Yeah, that's really small.
It's basically a 43 with a longer handle.
Okay.
The slides are interchangeable.
How many rounds does it fit in the magazine?
It's got 10. Well, now they made a 15-round magazine, but
oh, really? For that? Oh,
yeah, a 10-round.
Okay. So I think it's smaller than a Glock 26.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There's 4 concealed carry.
It's a recent addition to their line. Yeah, I think it came out 4 years ago.
And since it's so small and it is a 9mm, it's probably pretty snappy.
Yes, it's got great reviews. I like it. Just fit my hand. That's why I got it.
Well, yeah. I can understand though, if you're a new shooter, you might find that to be a little snappy.
Mhm.
Okay, so you got the 9mm, you got the 12, you got the 22. What else? What's the fourth one?
Can you guess?
I'm gonna say it's an M60 Rambo, fully automatic, with a grenade launcher, and it's got a tank and an
you
F-16.
are amazing. You are amazing. No, it's an AR. I got an AR.
Praise God.
And that's a lot of fun too.
That's awesome. That's a really well-rounded collection that you have. That's wonderful for your kids to grow up around that and to not be scared of it, but to respect it.
Yeah, they know the 4 laws. They'll recite. If I ask, what are the 4 rules of handgun safety, they'll spit them out. So, and they're very careful, and I would go very slow when I take them to the range. I'd go very, very slow and turn things, turn it over here. Look, here's the magazine. Look, go very step by step.
Yes.
And they loved it, and they would do it. They would go very slow, and it was good. I mean, learning anything, going slow and doing it right, and then once you do it right, speeding it up a little bit,
and be introduced to the proper use of that tool at such a young age, and have it imprinted in your being as not something to be scared of in itself, but to respect it and to understand what it's for. There's something that's very serious that it's for. It can also be fun if you observe the right protocols, which have to be taken very seriously, all as background conditions for having fun. But also just to have the confidence that this is quite a wonderful, powerful tool for a certain purpose, to keep scary things away. And there are people that want to take that right away from you, and that's the next step of their training, so that they understand that whole thing. And they're probably going to get it if they're related to you, they're going to get a good training in that.
Yeah, so I have a safe. It has my thumbprint. I'm the only one that can access it right now. But one of my daughters has expressed interest in once she feels comfortable being able to access it. If like my wife and I were out on a date or something like that. But they're not overly curious. They're not, they know it's there and they know what it's for, and
Yeah. The
it's
same
not
thing.
really
I
a
grew up
big deal
with, I grew up with guns. I grew up with guns in the house. I, there were strict rules on the access to the firearms, but I could have had access to them if there was an emergency situation, and I could have used them in self-defense.
Yeah.
That was the kind of household we grew up in. And so it's just a joy to hear you're passing that tradition on. And that's a long tradition. And you are very schmat and you have a PhD and you're doing this. That's pretty cool. It's cool that your kids are lucky because they're growing up with a PhD in philosophy as their dad. They have somebody trained in the Western tradition of great books, but also knows, like I just asked you a random question about Hinduism and you went right immediately to it. So it's not like that's all you can do. Of course, if you know the Western tradition, you're going to have to interact with stuff like Hinduism.
Yes.
I mean,
And
C.S. Lewis talks
my
about it.
daughters are very curious. My sons are too, but my daughters are older and they ask lots of questions
Cool.
about that, about religion and different worldviews. So we discuss it quite frequently, actually, at the dinner table.
That's
go
awesome.
into sort of stuff,
What
yeah.
what kind of courses have you taught? How many courses have you taught, and what are they called?
So I can go by subject matter or kind of course. So I started out teaching just intro. But now I've taught what's something called Western worldview. And that's the way I teach. I like to teach intro somewhat historically to see how and trace certain themes throughout Western history, philosophical themes, and see how they developed and changed or were criticized and so forth. So I guess I can lump all of that into introduction to philosophy and worldview. But I've taught introduction to ethics. I've taught medical ethics quite a bit. I taught business ethics once. I've taught environmental ethics. I've taught philosophy of the human person, I've done in different ways. In one way, I've focused on philosophy of mind and the different views of philosophical anthropology. That is, what is the nature of a human being, in particular, whether a human being is purely material, physical, or both material and immaterial, like non-material, or just image. So those different views. But I've also taught that in a different way. I've taught from a Thomistic point of view. When I was at St. Louis, I studied a lot of Thomas Aquinas. That's what I did my dissertation on, some of his thought. So I've taught
my next question is what you did your dissertation on. Yeah.
But so I've also taught, what else have I taught? Theology, I've taught Latin.
Oh, cool.
And I've taught, I've taught logic and critical thinking. Right now I'm teaching a lot of logic, and I really like teaching logic a lot.
Me too.
So that's
what's your method? What's your method for teaching logic? What do you use?
Well,
what do you start with? What do you?
I don't know if I'm totally happy with it, but lately I've been. The reason is because I teach online, and there's a few. I'm using a textbook that enables them to have exercises. I feel like if you're going to teach logic like Latin or any language, you need to be frequently doing practice.
That's right.
And so I got a text. I like the text a lot, but it involves that it has a component where they can do practice online. So that's why I'm using that. So it's at the first few weeks, I'm just teaching about what I call, or what has been called, I call it that because it's been called that for a long, long time, the 3 acts of the mind. So there's the first act is understanding. No, but I know he teaches that as well. Okay. I just kind of grabbed stuff from Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas.
The 3 acts of the mind. Okay.
So the first one is understanding, where you have an awareness of an object, and it over time, I mean, this is both developmentally and psychologically. So human development, I mean, infants going into toddlerhood and growing up, you can see this happening. They don't have the ability to have understanding at first. They only have recognition, which is different. And I've seen this. I taught kindergarten math, and I saw this over and over again. They knew the scribbles that counted, this means 2 and this means 3. It means it, but it's not. It's not it. That's not 2 and that's not 3. And then I'd hold up dots or macaronis or whatever we're using that day, right? Little bears, plastic bears, and put 3 of them. That's 3. Now you can become aware of 3, right? So what I was trying to get the kindergartners to do, sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but this will come back to the first act of the mind. What I was trying to get the kindergartners to do was see, the way Aristotle would put it, see the universal, right? See the reality of 2 or 3 or whatever the number was, and not the sign. And over time, this works. I mean, they understand now when they see an equation, we're talking about these quantities. We're talking about a part of reality we call quantity.
Yeah.
And its relationships. So I was trying to get them to have an intuition. And if this was a charter school for children who were called at risk, a lot of their parents were, or their fathers were in jail. They hardly spoke English, but I saw like real progress when I got them to have intuition. All I was doing was teaching math. Anyways, that's the first act. You have an intuition of a reality there that has an identity that you can recognize now. When you recognize a whole bunch of different things, they have the same identity, the identity across all these particular things. So Aristotle says you recognize the universal. That's the first act. And then once you do that, you can recognize universals as having certain relationships with other universals. And you can form the second act of the mind, which is called judgment. Sometimes it's called inclusion, composition and division. So if you have the concept apple, if you have an understanding of apple and you have the understanding of red, you see that those can belong together. And certain concepts or certain understandings exclude each other. So that's the basis for judgment. And judgments are formed. Sorry, I feel like I'm giving class all of a sudden here. Judgments are formed in a certain structure we call propositional structure. It has a subject and a predicate, and now you can relate things. And then that leads to the third act, which is argumentation or reasoning. You see relationships between judgments.
Can we be aware of marriage?
Yes, you can see marriage is a natural kind.
Okay.
It's a natural
thing. So in terms of judgment and inclusion, would that include 2 men? Or would that exclude
the universal marriage would not include it. Now you can use that word, and that's what happens. People use the word for different things. So they will use the word man and woman.
Can you give me an analogy for what you mean by that when you say that the judgment of the universal would not include two men? Would that the analogy be something like that 2 could not be read? 2 apples could be read, but not 2. What would be a good analogy for that?
Well,
so people could see that it's not based in hatred.
I mean,
are you hatred? Maybe you are hateful. Are you hateful?
I hope not. I don't feel any hatred, and I don't wish any ill on anybody.
Okay.
In fact,
so this is not. Are you in the Klan?
Am I in the what?
Are you in the Klan? The Ku Klux Klan?
I'm in the. No, I'm in.
We have to ask these questions because that's what people think as soon as they hear what you said. They think, "Oh,
see,
you."
Well, look,
are a hateful.
There is a natural. This is the way I'd like it. I don't hear it explained this way very much, but this is the way I think about it. You're using a word to refer to something, to signify something. Okay, red signifies a certain quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can use red to. We can use it in different ways. So you get really angry, and I say he was red with anger or something like that. We know we're using the word in a different way. We have a convention, right?
Right.
Well, you can do that with the word marriage. You can do that with the word man.
That's true.
It just needs to be pointed out now. And I think that you're not using the word in the way that we have been using it.
Yeah.
So how are you using it?
That's called equivocation. If you don't point it out, it's called equivocation. Yeah. And it's a fallacy.
So the question then is, how
And
are you using it?
Obergefell committed that fallacy. Actually, I should
And I think
say
there's-
not Obergefell himself, but Justice Kennedy committed that fallacy. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So no, I'm just saying, I think that might, maybe, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm welcome to argument against it, but that may be a way to get to the heart of what's going on with language and the idea that
What's a
a
good
man-
analogy for marriage?
a
though?
man can have women genitalia. I think one of the ways to get to the heart of that debate is to say, well, we've been using the word a certain way. How are you using it now? What are you referring to?
Okay.
Because you can acknowledge it's just a fact of history. We've been using the word man to refer to this sort of thing.
Well, I was
That's
talking
how
about
we
marriage.
Oh, you were talking. Yeah, I guess I
talking
was
about marriage.
interested in that. Well,
But
we've been using marriage to-
you nailed down the next topic, which came very close after that. As soon as that marriage thing got redefined, and that is what happened. It was redefined.
Yeah. So in both cases, you're taking a word that's been used a certain way,
Mhm.
and now they want to use it a different way. And
Sure.
therefore you can ask them, well, how are you using it? And why are you using it that way?
Mhm.
Right? Because we use words for a purpose.
Well, they want
We
you
use
to use
words
it that way too.
Yes, that's right. So
So then
in the case of man, I
further
think
question, wouldn't you say
there-
the further question is, why do you want me to use that word
that is
that way?
that is the further an essential question here.
Yeah.
Because, and I think if this is more clear, and maybe it's unique, I'm not sure, but it's more clear with the issue of saying that now you can be a man with women genitalia. Okay, you can use the word that way, because the question you can ask is, okay, what are you referring to, or how are you using the word? And I think it turns out on inspection that that there is no referent. There's no universal there. You might say that there's no single thing that's present across all cases of uses of that language. And so what's going on here is they're not using language to refer, but to get me and everybody else to act a certain way.
Yeah. To vote Democrat, basically, and to raise little
To accept a certain,
yeah,
I don't know, just come, to get away from natural boundaries as much as you can.
right. Does that
And
bother
it bothers me a lot. I think it's insidious.
It bothers them. It bothers them when you don't do what they tell you.
And
to
I'm not
do.
I'm not saying I wouldn't impute bad motives to any particular individual unless there was evidence. I think it's proper to assume the best of somebody until there's evidence to the contrary. But in general, I think there's a spirit behind this that is insidious. I think it's
You by spirit.
I feel like I don't have
like a devil, like a demon.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's true too. But I mean a spirit, a certain moral attitude or certain moral outlook.
Now you have a PhD in philosophy. You're highly educated, and you believe demons exist.
I have firsthand experiences of demons.
Okay.
I know a lot. I haven't talked about this a lot to a lot of people.
Okay.
When I was, I had kind of a troubled youth, you might say. And one facet of that was when I was in
Did
junior
you do drugs?
I did.
Okay.
Until I was 20, until I had a conversion experience in my bedroom, reading the New Testament.
The reason I'm asking is somebody's going to wonder, was this drug-induced experience?
No, this was not. Before that, I got into the occult. Actually, this was when I was about 12 or 13, and a friend or someone at school was really into the occult. And I was really interested in that. And I got into it too.
Can you
And there were
explain what that
things-
means, that word, how you're using it?
The word occult means hidden things, basically. But the way he talked about it was he would practice white magic. And so I read.
Was he in the Klan?
No.
I had
White magic was supposed to be benign and benevolent use of these. It consisted in rituals with candles and certain spells and incantations and so forth, and involved things like what is called astral projection, the idea of which is your soul travels to a different dimension, whatever. That was the explanation. But we did these practices, and I had a number of terrifying experiences that one of them, the most frightening one, and the reason why I said I don't want to have anything to do with this, is we were in his house alone practicing this astral projection. No one's around, no pets, nothing. This is an Aptos, and anyways, I'll make this story short. We were, supposed to be in this burning candles incantation, trying to get into this kind of meditative state. And then he got really afraid and he said, we need to stop this. We're being attacked.
What age are you at this time?
I'm 12.
That's pretty young.
Yes.
I was picturing you at like 16 or something.
No, I was 12. My parents divorced when I was 9, and I just was off on my own a lot, getting into various kinds of trouble. And the door started violently shaking, like someone was pounding on it. It started like this, and then it grew and grew, and I thought and we were in a room, like a closed room. No one was there. No one else
was there.
There.
A storm?
That's one experience
something?
of many. No. It was a sunny, calm day. It was completely quiet in his house before this, and it started up, and then he did some sort of incantations, and it stopped. And I said,
California? Was it an earthquake?
This is Aptos, California. No.
So there's an earthquake?
No.
Okay.
No, this is one of many.
How do you know it wasn't an earthquake?
Because I know what an earthquake is like. And it doesn't just shake one object.
Other objects were staying still.
Yes.
Like pictures weren't falling down.
Nothing. It was just the door. And then I've seen things, and because before that I've had other experiences. Anyways, it just was.
How many experiences have you had, and like what would you say the vividness or the quality was? Like, was it as vivid as the experience you have talking to me right now?
No, I'll count among them experience with Ouija boards. I was into Ouija boards for a while, and that thing would move. Two people that had never really used it. And
is your memory of this just as clear as like your memory of other events that for sure happened?
Yes, because they were frightening to me.
Okay. So and it was as vivid as your memories of me, for example, like 20 years ago or whatever.
Okay. Oh yes. And I wasn't on any drugs any of these times.
Okay.
In any case, I
asked those questions not for me.
Sound too interesting. I know
I asked those questions because somebody in the future is wondering those questions, and that's why I'm asking them. Because I want you to be challenged on that and to articulate the answers to the questions that they would have, the person listening.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
And they're legitimate questions.
I believe you. I've had an experience myself that I don't ever talk about. And I don't think it's just one experience. It's one experience that I've had that I don't ever talk about. But it's helpful to hear your experience as well. Yeah. So you believe demons exist?
Yes, I didn't know what they were at the time. I just thought they were evil spirits, demons, but I wasn't at the time thinking in terms of a Christian worldview, although I had that in the back of my mind.
Were you a Christian at the time?
No. Well, I had been baptized.
Did you
but I didn't
believe
have
in
Christian
demons at the
beliefs.
time?
I don't know what I believed. I was searching.
Because
In a sense, I couldn't shake certain Christian beliefs that I had, although I was willingly trying to shake them.
if
I
you
was
were
trying to get rid of
terrified,
them.
if
Yes.
you were terrified, what did you do?
What did I do then?
What did you do? Because when
Once it
people are
stopped,
terrified,
I left. Once I stopped, I left.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And I even wanted to have nothing to do with that friend. I just didn't want to be around. I wanted to get as far away from that as I could.
Okay. Did you believe in angels?
I probably did. I didn't think about it in those terms.
Did you believe in God?
I did, but I didn't. I was trying not to.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I could never shake the belief that there was some ultimate reality beyond the material universe. I tried. I tried to be an atheist. I tried to even be agnostic and just let it at that, but I couldn't, because I really wanted to know the truth about these things. There was part of me that, even when I was running away, there were many times before the age of 20 that I would just, in a moment, I would look up at the sky and I'd say, God, if you're real, show me. And then I'd go back to my stupidity and partying and whatever I was doing. But there were just moments, like several of them, I remember.
Did God ever?
I mean, one time I was like moving from my house and I was carrying a couch or something, and I just caught the stars in the sky, and it just I just looked up and said, if you're real, show me, because there was something deep inside me that wants to know the truth. I mean, look, Lucas, if there's any question that's important, it's that question. I mean, there are a lot of important questions to ask. Whether God exists or not,
okay,
that's not an inconsequential question.
Yeah.
Right. So as much as I wanted to ignore that question, I couldn't, because I knew it was the most important question.
Do you feel like God answered that prayer?
Yes, most certainly.
How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I had a conversion experience in my bedroom around the age of 20. It was a very strong emotional experience.
Were you living at home? Where were you?
No, I wasn't living at home. I was living with a roommate. I was going to De Anza Community College in Cupertino, California.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's a lot of parts to this story, but anyways, that was the beginning of me. Well, so you've heard some of them. I would look every once in a while at a party, moving furniture, wherever. I mean, it would just happen in the weirdest moments, where I just felt like I had to shove everything to the side and speak out loud to the sky. I don't know why I turned to the sky, but I guess that's what, it draws your thoughts upward and outward beyond, right? So that's what I did. I say, if you're real, I mean, those are the words I spoke. If you're real, show me. Which is kind of, I mean, there's a bit of irony to that, right? Because I'm speaking out as if someone will listen. So when you say, did you believe in God? I think I did, but I was trying not to. But in these certain moments, I just well, I really want to know. Anyways.
So you didn't at that point, at that moment, you didn't think people in China are upside down now. And to them, I'm upside down. I'm actually not looking up at all. I'm looking down. But actually, if you think of Earth just hanging there in space, how do you know which way is up and down? Actually, we don't know. It's all relative. That didn't occur to you, and it's just space out there?
No, I didn't have those thoughts. The thought that I had was,
that's how an atheist is listening to this. They're thinking you're crazy, or you're just not thinking.
Why is that? How is that?
I'm going to be the atheist. I'm going to say, like I just said, Earth is just hanging there. And, well, I mean, lots of other stuff is going. Apparently, Earth is moving.
Do things just hang there without having been hung? That's the question I want.
Well, you think it's up, but how do you know it's up? It
Well, I
might
didn't,
be down.
did I
and-
say
and-
up? I think I said out. Look out
Okay.
from where I am.
All right.
That's another, that's, I was
It's up
being,
to you. I mean, it's up to you. From your
I hope-
perspective, it's up. And you're looking at space and you think God is in space.
I don't know if I thought that. It was just the inclination. I think part of it, there's so many, there's other parts in my psychology. I had dreams about the end of the world when I was 3. So
Oh, my
maybe, and
goodness.
they
You had a
involved the
traumatic
stars.
childhood.
I did. It was weird. Maybe I can't explain why
I shouldn't
did
be
have
laughing
those.
at that.
I had more than one. But for some reason, and my dad got me into astronomy when I was little. So maybe I thought of space as the great beyond or something.
Did your
like that.
parents, were they Christians or did they believe in God?
No, there was my mother had a conversion when I was 5.
Okay.
But so I don't remember any Christianity until I was 5, but my dad would mock it. So I had
Well, what was his beliefs?
different, huh?
What was his belief?
He didn't have a belief system. It was mostly negative as far as I could tell.
Gotcha.
He's told me once he was an empiricist and believed in science.
Hmm.
Without
I can
saying
predict who he
that
voted
meant.
for president.
In any
If
case,
he voted.
yeah, I don't
He
know.
voted for Jerry Brown, didn't he, for governor? I
He's
know.
my father, whom I love very much, is a private man. But I remember him mocking Christian doctrines and beliefs when I was a kid.
Do you still talk?
So
Do you still talk to him?
yeah. I talked to him. I talked to him a couple weeks ago when he was in the hospital. Nothing serious.
Is he in California?
Yeah, he's in California. He's moving to the East Coast now.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot in the back of my mind that would come bubble up in just strange times. And then at the Anza, people handed me those Gideon New Testaments with the Psalms and Proverbs.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
green. You know what
Those
I'm
are
talking
awesome.
about?
Those are awesome.
And I because I'm just this way, I'm very curious about the end. I wanted to read the end first. So I went straight to the book of Revelation. And I wanted to know about the end of the world. And I was terrified.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I better start reading this Bible.
Whoa.
So I got an Old and New Testament.
Hmm.
And then I started reading. I thought, I'll just read from the beginning. I'll just read the whole thing from the beginning.
What kind of courses were you taking at this time? Did that have anything
I was
to do
studying
with...
music. I was a music major. I went in as a math major and a music major. But then I got really interested in the linguistics. So I switched my major to linguistics, but I stayed with all the music classes just because I love music. So that's what I was studying there. And so I got
Where'd you go?
Old
Where'd
and
you finish your undergrad?
Then I went to San Jose State in San Jose, and I got a minor. That's when I discovered my love for philosophy. But I went in there as a music composition major. I wrote compositions. But the teachers there they liked the avant-garde sort of stuff. In fact, one of the teachers there, kind of famous for this, I think it's his real name. It's Alan Strange. And he fit the name. He was an interesting guy. Always in sweatpants. That's what I remember. Very portly, always in sweatpants.
Avant-garde.
He bragged
They
about
must have been
having created it.
Republicans.
He bragged about having composed a piece of music that made someone physically vomit. And
Ooh.
and I like that story because I created a piece of music that was electronic. And I remember we had to perform these or have them performed if they're electronic, right? As a final, like it was our final exam to submit And I remember I had a lot of really high, shrill, metallic noises in there. And I remember watching him wince in discomfort. And I just felt, I don't know why, but just felt like so satisfied that I had made Alan Strange wince in discomfort, who bragged about making someone vomit with his composition. But I digress.
Is that really music then?
That's a good question. is something that just makes you vomit music? I don't think so.
I think it's noise, but I don't know if
It's
music.
noise.
Okay. I don't know. I don't really know the answer. I haven't thought about the philosophy of music.
I've thought about it a bit. I think we get into this. I hope this doesn't sound like trickery to anybody, but I think what we get into is this idea again that words are used to draw joint attention to something. I use the word red to get you to think about a certain quality, right?
Yeah.
And then we use the same word for other things that aren't identical to the first thing. And so with things like art, when people talk about redefining things, well, that's maybe a helpful way to think about it. You're just taking a word and you're picking some other referent, picking up some other thing to refer to. So that, I think, needs to be said when you say, is that music? Well, people use the word music for that. Is that the same thing that Mozart did? No, I don't think so. In any case, I was reading the Old Testament and I got very confused. Lots of ritual sacrifices and all that, the Levitical laws. I was kind of just coming to this with not tons of background, a little bit of Sunday school.
This is still at the community college, De Anza?
This is at De Anza.
Okay.
And then I told my mom, I think my mom had gotten me the Bible because I asked for it. And I said, this is confusing. She said, well, just read the New Testament, read the Gospels. So I did that. So I started reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in John, I believe it's in chapter 13 or 14, Jesus says, you won't see me for a little while, and then you'll see me. And I read that. I mean, I'd read lots of other things. I'd probably been reading the New Testament now for weeks and weeks. But for some reason, that just struck something in me. And the exact words, I may have even said it aloud, but at least these were the words that formed in my mind. I thought, what have I been doing? And I wept very strongly and begged Jesus to forgive me. And then I didn't know what to do. So I read for 3 months. I would sit in my room and read the Bible while my friends are taking bong hits out in the living room. It was just, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I started, then I found there's a denomination called Foursquare, somebody I knew that also I used to party with, but now was going to this church. So I ended up going to this Foursquare church. I don't know if you know what that denomination is. It's kind of like Assemblies of God. Came out of the Azusa Street revivals in the first decade of the 20th century. Yes.
I've been to those churches. I've attended those churches. I attended them when I was an undergrad, in fact.
So I was a part of that, and it was a startup pioneering church. So,
Chapel,
you'd show up early and I would put out chairs for people to sit in. We were renting a community hall or something on Sundays. And at the same time, since I'm very interested, I want to know the truth about these things, I started reading theology. And just picture this. I was reading, do you know who Arthur Pink is? Very severe, austere Calvinist author. I was reading his
Does he write about does he write about miracle? No, I'm thinking of Walter Wink. Sorry.
No, this is Arthur W. Pink. I think the W is right. So there's a W in there. You might have
heard of him before.
Anyways, he wrote stuff like, "Are you really saved?" and "Are you among the elect?" and that kind of Calvinist stuff. So I was reading very severe Calvinist books while going to a Pentecostal-ish sort of, and I had lots of theology questions naturally, and they couldn't answer any of my questions.
Good luck.
And they told me not to even ask, basically. Yeah.
Well, when you said what kind of building they were renting out, I was like, yeah, these Foursquare denominations, they never have the beautiful buildings that have been there for 200 years. They never have that. But okay. That actually has a lot to do with why they can't answer your theology question.
Yeah, their idea of I mean, they would ordain anyone who had a kind of a fiery disposition,
and that
and
could play the
zealous
guitar.
zealous, yeah. So these are very extremely different Christianities,
Sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say they're extremely different. They have a different worldview. I mean, one of them says Jesus didn't die for everybody, and that God chose some people to go to hell, created some people to go to hell. That's a very different view. In my understanding, that's a different worldview than the denial of that, than the contradictory of that, or the contrary, at least, that Jesus died for everyone, that God did not create people to go to hell, but to be with him forever, right? In any case, lots of theological questions. And that's what led me to Biola, because I thought to myself, I need to figure this out for myself. I need to learn Hebrew and Greek and see what the scriptures say. I thought in their original languages, then I can know what the answers to these theological questions.
So you had a high view of scripture.
And all my questions were answered. Huh?
You had a high view of scripture because you thought scripture was going to answer your question.
Yes, that's right. And I still do. I believe it's the word of God, divinely inspired. So
what did you discover when you went to Biola? Did you have the answer to your question?
No, it exacerbated the problem, actually.
Okay, you're depressing
but
anybody that's like, tell me the answer, tell me what to do. Now it's not a simple answer like go to Biola. So what is the answer?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
you said it made it worse.
It exacerbated it for me because I see that there's lots of different theologies and bodies of belief that all call themselves Christianity. And in my mind, Christianity was the true religion revealed by God. And I wanted to know which of these Christianities is the Christianity. The idea that you could have contradictory beliefs under the umbrella of orthodoxy made no sense to me and still makes no sense to me. So I went through different phases. There's a phase I went through that I'll call existential Christianity, or my existentialist phase, where I thought what matters is that you've encountered the real risen Christ, and the doctrinal stuff, that's kind of peripheral. What matters is this existential encounter. And that lasted for a few months. And then I thought, no, that's not right. Doctrine matters.
Well,
of course,
yeah, it does matter that you experience God, but
that does matter. But
that needs to be spelled out and filled out.
That's
how
right.
do you know?
Right. Because people can have
really God.
Mormons have what they call a burning in the bosom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how could you know that? Test the spirits. Well, how are you going to test the spirits? Doctrinally, right? And the doctrine will include truths about morals and truths about other things, like truths, metaphysical truths, you might say, truths about reality, what God is like, and so forth. So then I thought, okay, here's what matters. It's the creed. It's the historical creeds, right? The Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. That there was this idea in the background of, second primary doctrine or essential doctrine and non-essential doctrine. That was a framework that was kind of in the back of my mind and around me at this time. So I thought, okay, so what's essential, the doctrine that's essential to Christianity are the creeds. And I remember taking a historical theology class. I forget the name of the teacher.
Gomes?
But he was the one that
Alan Gomes.
No, was it Alan Gomes? It was the one who rehabituated Shed. Remember that theology book? He was an editor of the Shed, new Shed theology book. I think it was Alan Gomes.
What's SHED stand for?
That was the last name of the author of this systematic
Oh.
theology book that was adopted by Kevin Lewis and others. Do you remember that book?
No, I didn't have to take.
You
Well,
didn't have to. Kevin Lewis
I
used it.
had
in
theology at Denver Seminary, and so I had that
Okay.
transferred in.
So there was
my
Erickson. That was
theology
the one we used
yeah,
first, and then
that's
we went
the
to
one.
SHED.
Oh, okay.
In any
Yeah,
case, Alan Gomes, I think, instrumental in having that edition of SHED. In any case, I did really well in that class. I remember getting I remember not only acing the exams, but getting over 100 because there was some bonus stuff. So I loved that subject. But and I remember my hopes were kind of like, okay, now we're going to get talking about the creeds and what happened in the Reformation. And I thought, okay, and then I discovered somebody, I don't remember who, proposed this during the throes of the Reformation. And I think Calvin was in play at this time. And he said, the creeds, we just all, we all need to agree on the creeds. And then Alan Gomes, I'm assuming now, I think I'm remembering too, it was Alan Gomes. He said that all the different groups, the fighting groups, wanted to kill him, literally. And I thought, that's crazy. I mean, I thought that would be the thing to unify, that would be Christianity. Everybody would agree that's Christianity. And the one who proposed it was having death threats and had to flee. And so I thought, I don't know. I guess I just don't know. I want to be a Christian, but I don't know what the Christianity is.
Yeah.
And I just had to, and then I forget the guy's name. There were people that were testing out different non-evangelical versions of Christianity, like orthodoxy. So one guy was considering becoming, I guess the label is Eastern Orthodox. And he was sharing a little bit about that. And
is this
he
the
was
same
bringing
class?
up arguments. No, this wasn't in a class now. This was just among a group of friends.
Gotcha.
We'd sit at a table. You probably know him. I just don't remember his name.
Keith?
It may have been Keith. That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right. And he was bringing up arguments against, or not arguments, but he was talking about how do you establish the canon?
Yeah.
How is the canon established? Those sorts of questions. And I thought that's a good question. I also I listened to lectures by Dan Yin. Is that the right name? I'm trying to remember.
He taught there for a while. He's now at what's that school in Indiana? Taylor, I think.
Okay.
He had a PhD from philosophy and from USC, and he studied under Willard, and he did his dissertation on John Locke.
That's right.
Which is, man, I never got to talk to him seriously about John Locke. I always wanted to really nail down John Locke, and now that's one of those things where I actually feel like I would love to do that before I die. But I don't know what I'm gonna ever
to Dan
do.
Yin about John Locke.
Just try to get I want to understand John Locke more.
Yeah, I've tried to read him. There are a few philosophers that I would love to understand, and I've tried to read, and the writing style feels impenetrable to me sometimes. Like Kant. I've studied Kant. I've written stuff on Kant. I've even published stuff that discusses Kant. Yeah. But I remember I tried to read Kant, and for 3 years, I think I couldn't make it through the first few pages of his, because I would lose. There were so many dang semicolons. I forgot what the subject was when I got to the near the end of the sentence. So anyways, John Locke is not complicated like that. It's just so dry. And and maybe it's because he's very, I don't know what it is about John Locke. I just find it some of the most boring. I found Aristotle that way too. I felt like Aristotle has a sentence here and then the next sentence, and there's got to be something that belongs in between. And he just skipped it.
At what point did you know that you wanted to do a PhD in philosophy? Do you recall?
Oh, I felt that way.
Was?
Oh yeah, before I left Biola, maybe within the first few weeks of Biola. I loved philosophy.
Was it the love of it, or was it just almost like an itch that you couldn't scratch, or what
I'd say
kind
it's
of
both.
annoying?
I mean, I just felt like the idea that you can think about things, the things that matter most carefully and arrive at the truth about those questions was to me
You
better
believe
than
that
anything
that
else.
actually happens in philosophy?
Yes.
That you
Yes, I do.
arrive at the truth?
Yes.
Okay. You're just
Or else I
reassured.
would-
You just reassured a bunch of people because so far it's felt like in your journey when you're talking about discovery, it felt like there was no answer.
Well, I haven't finished yet.
Yeah, I know. You obviously are against
teasing you.
Calvinism, so you know you don't
I have a bit of an animus
disagree with-
against Calvin.
okay.
I
So you-
agree with Saint Alphonsus Liguori, who said Calvin uttered a great blasphemy in his doctrine about God.
What's his name?
Alphonsus Liguori.
How do you spell the last name?
It's French, Liguori.
Okay.
Anyways, so I forget there's different parts of the story, and now I'm trying to remember where we're at. I know we were talking. So everybody wanted to kill this guy, or you ask the questions if you would like.
Well, I'm interested in.
I go on tangents very easily.
You had somehow St. Louis University got on your radar. What was it about that school?
A friend of mine recommended that I go there because he knew I was interested. I went there with an interest in epistemology, and in particular, what is called realist phenomenology. And the basic idea of realist phenomenology, they had a slogan. It was an anti-Kantian slogan, and it was back to the things themselves. There was a group of philosophers around the turn of the 20th century who thought we can get out of this Cartesian skeptical bubble that Descartes thinks he got himself out of, but nobody else, the philosophers who followed him, don't think that he got out of it. And then you get Kant, who even reverses the knowledge relationship and says we construct objects of knowledge, we don't discover them as they are.
Right.
And the realist phenomenologists are totally against that. They're like, no, you can get to the essences themselves. You can know essences. That's what
are some key names in this?
So Husserl, the early Husserl at least, and if you talk to Dallas Willard, I did talk to Dallas Willard in his office. He said Husserl gets a bad name. Everybody says he left that idea, but he didn't. But in any case, Husserl, Adolf Reinach, and
Adolf, that would scare me away.
Adolf Reinach, not to be confused with another Adolf, a German Adolf.
Well, it's like it's like Jason. There's a bunch of people named that.
That's true. That's a good point. And then Dietrich von Hildebrand was one of these, and there's some others that were part of this realist group that wanted to get away from idealism, because certain phenomenologists, they call it phenomenology because it has to do with your experience. You're analyzing your experience.
Right.
Some of them went off into an idealist interpretation of that. Idealism is the view that objects of reality are constituted by ideas, basically by mental acts.
Yeah, and that's wrong.
Right. Yes, that's wrong.
Okay, now hold on a sec. Who was at St. Louis that got these guys on your radar? The realist phenomenology somehow connected to St. Louis. Who was that person?
Michael Barber was one of the main, and so I traveled to St. Louis University before I applied there and went and spoke with him. And then John Greco was an epistemologist, so I thought he was a very big name in epistemology, still is. So I thought I'd study with him. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I didn't know much about Eleanor.
I was waiting for you to say her name.
Who was my dissertation director and my mentor.
Stump is nowhere in this conversation, but
I know
you finally mentioned
not yet.
her.
I mean, I knew she was there, and I hadn't read. I hope she's not going to be mad at me.
She's a famous everybody. She's a famous
Thomas. Yeah.
Famous
Thomas
medieval philosophy scholar. at University of St. Louis. And if you were listening carefully, you heard Errin say earlier he did his dissertation on Thomas Aquinas, who is a medieval philosopher. So
That's
okay.
right.
All right.
You know how graduate school goes. Things can change, right? Once you get there and you're
So how did that work for you? You got there. Well, and what changed and when? How did that happen?
Here's the thing. I thought in order to do epistemology, I thought anytime you're making a claim, whether it's in the area of epistemology or ethics or in any area of philosophy, you're presupposing something about reality. You're presupposing what's called metaphysics. Metaphysics is the area of philosophy that deals with what is real, what it means to be real, what exists, and so forth. So you're presupposing certain metaphysical claims. So I wanted to get to the metaphysics. I kind of wanted to do the metaphysics of epistemology, something like that. And I thought realist phenomenology is doing that because it's describing the essences. But when I studied contemporary metaphysics, I felt very depressed. And I mean that. I felt like it was bankrupt of any of the things that were most important: free will, knowledge of God, things like that. I thought this is
the contemporary people were not talking about that, or they were dismissing.
They were, but it was in a way that it seemed to, like, I don't know how to describe it, Lucas, other than saying it sucked. I felt like it sucked all the life out of it.
Did you just mistake me for C.S. Lewis? Thank you.
It's so easy to do.
Thank
I'm sorry.
you so much. I need to go.
It could have
grab
been
a beer
Kevin.
now.
There could be, there's a lot of people named Lewis. I don't know if you knew that, but there are, just like with Adolf, there are a lot of people named Lewis. So it could have been some other Lewis. I'm not sure, but I think it might have been C.S. Lewis. In any case, well, let's just make this, maybe I can make this story short. I started reading Thomas Aquinas because I took Eleanor Stump's class, and I thought, this is the metaphysics I've been looking for. Like I even said that in that voice.
Was she a good teacher?
She's a great teacher, and a wonderful human being. And I felt like she was so kind to me. She kind of took me under her wing. And so we had a good relate. And not to say that, I mean, she scolded me. She has a way, I don't know.
She was a Calvinist?
No, she's not. Definitely not.
What did she scold you for?
For, certain weaknesses, certain strengths can be also weaknesses. I just was never satisfied with a question. I want to keep going deeper. She's like, Errin, you have to start somewhere. You can't. She started saying, you're exemplifying my joke about the guy who goes into a party and says, let's talk about John Locke. Says, wait, to understand John Locke, you need to understand Descartes. But in order to understand Descartes, you need to understand, I don't know, whoever, Suarez or something like that. So she said, you're act like that. I'm like, okay, I'll work on that. In any case, so I did my dissertation with her on Thomistic metaphysics. And
who else was on your committee?
John Greco and another guy. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden. I must be tired or something.
Well, just his social security number if you don't remember his name.
That's right. I'm forgetting that too.
Okay, well,
both metaphysicians. Well, he was working in the metaphysics of power, this other guy, and that's what my dissertation was on. It was on Thomas's account of power, of causal power.
Oh, okay.
So that's what my dissertation was on. But that sounds quite technical, and it is quite technical. But for me, it meant a lot because it's a fundamental part of his metaphysics. And to me, it made sense of all kinds of stuff outside metaphysics. Made sense of epistemology. It made sense of ethics. It was a kind of, there are certain concepts or ideas or accounts that are like keys to elucidating lots of other things. And that's what I felt about his idea of power, which is
the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that you did is that for your dissertation is, hasn't that been written about before? How do you find
there's not? You would think so, but he doesn't have a single statement of it or a single passage or a single work on it. It's just like in a background
It's
everywhere.
like 700 years ago, right?
So I
750
won
years
a
ago.
dissertation scholarship, and I just read for a year. I just read. That's all I did. I was paid to read. One of the best years of my life. I just read all his commentaries, all his disputations, and try to, glean. Every time he talked about power, I have this book. It's probably right next to me in this drawer. I mean, I took all these notes, like I filled pages of just references to wherever he talked about power and what he said about it, and then tried to catalog it. I even started like a table of contents to categorize it, but that was so boring. I never got finished with that. But
so you read real books, like physical objects? You
yeah,
didn't read
I have
online?
them. There's some of them are down here on the shelf behind me.
That's old school, man. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, and
You get into the Latin?
I can't read books without writing in them. I would read both English, because I didn't, when I came to St. Louis University, I didn't know Latin. So I got a Latin book and just tried to teach myself Latin. And then I would read Latin and I'd try to translate it to, anyways, so I did that dissertation.
How long
And
did it take you to write it?
it took a long time, especially Eleanor Stump. She's exacting, which is great. But I think I was told more than once, this is okay. You got your draft here. Now throw it in the trash and start over. So some of it was like that, and not in a bad way, but like, now you've gotten all this stuff out. Now you need to redo it and reapproach it with a certain sort of focus. Wow. And it was, so I did a lot. I mean, I wrote hundreds, and I don't know how many pages I wrote before I had something that was worth. The difficulty was that not only was I trying to glean from all over Thomas's corpus of work a certain account that he never really lays out, but it's there. It's just there in the background. But I was using that and applying that to contemporary metaphysics, because since the 60s, some metaphysics have had there was kind of an anti-David Hume push, a push against David Hume. Mm-hmm. And they said that powers are real, basically.
This is obviously way after Thomas Aquinas, way after.
Yes, this is in the 1960s. And
what are these people called? Who are they? Who are these people?
They go by different labels: powers realists, neo-Aristotelians.
Can you throw a couple names out?
John Heil was actually, he was at Washington University, which is across the park, near St. Louis University.
Yeah. So you got Adolf, and then you got Heil. I'm a little bit nervous about what you're going to say after that.
But so I was trying to take Thomas Aquinas and apply, so it's like they were inventing the wheel. I felt these contemporary metaphysicians, they're asking all kinds of questions and debating and really not getting to the bottom of these questions, because powers seem very weird, and they're really weird.
What's weird about them?
What's weird about them is let's say you have a match, you strike it, it explodes into flame, right? It ignites, right. And you say, oh, that is combustible. Okay, you've named a power. A power is basically an ability to do something. Okay, what makes that the power that it is? It has a certain, the contemporaries call it a manifestation. It has a certain effect or a certain way of operating, right?
They don't say they don't say anything about.
So you define. Well, they don't use that language. They use, contemporaries don't use that language.
That's the first thing I think of is potential.
Right. So that's what Thomas Aquinas calls it potency. But we say potential. What is that word? It comes from the Latin potency, which is translated power, right? That's what potential means: powerful, able to do, or able to be. Yeah. In any case, it's weird that you characterize something by a quality that it doesn't have, right, but that it would have. That's what's weird about it. It's like pointed. And they tried to and a lot of contemporaries try to get away from that pointing. But that's the heart of it. And that's what Thomas says. The qualities of things in the world point, they're directed. He called it, they're intentional. Combustibility is an intentional thing. It intends a certain kind of quality.
You're making matches sound like really sexy right now. Kind of
Okay.
like, no, that's not the right word exactly, but there's mystical almost.
It is, and I'll tell you why. Because I'll just cut to the chase here. What Thomas says is that we talk about causation. The causation we talk about is usually what we call efficient causation, the kind of causation that produces something, makes an effect, right?
You're using Aristotle's language now.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
For those who are paying attention.
And so there's a whole historical story to tell where there's other causes. And I'm going to say now, and I'll say why in a second. The most important one is final causation. That was rejected. I mean, in 500 years ago, that was
by
you can't
who?
see it.
Not by
you can't
everybody.
see purposes.
Not
by everybody, but
Yeah.
largely.
There was a movement that
because-
was popular that rejected it.
Well, I mean, if you read Descartes talking about powers, he mocks it, and other of
But
those.
there were still people that were reading Aquinas that didn't reject it, right? I mean,
That's right. There were
Catholic circles.
Yeah, Catholics, but even one of my favorite modern philosophers, Leibniz, was open to causal. He liked causal powers,
Oh, I
but
didn't know that.
or he liked final causation. That is to say.
Oh, okay.
But in any case, so final causation is the purpose. You can just say it's what things aim for.
Right.
And the reason that was rejected is because you can't see that.
Yeah.
You can't observe, right?
Not exactly.
You only see the way
You
things
can kind of-
behave.
Yeah. Well,
You
I
can
can
see-
look at
you know-
I can look at a knife and I think I can see the purpose of it.
You do,
A
but you
murderer
know-
looks at the knife differently. Maybe.
But you know the purpose because you know a certain kind of activity.
Yeah. I've thought
And
about this.
And that's
I've
the
thought about
activity
this
that
quite a bit.
defines it. Okay.
I thought about this quite a bit recently, just this past week, because there was a birthday party and the setting was church. The setting is people that are not necessarily against guns, but they would probably be squirmy and squealy. And there's a reason I'm saying this. The knife used to cut the cake was probably 9 inches long and could have easily been a murder weapon in a horror movie of some kind. Nobody had the slightest squirmy, squeezy reaction to that when anybody.
It looked like it was made for nefarious purposes, right? It had that shape.
Well, it could have been, but that's the funny thing about it is that that these folks pretend to be so squirmy with guns. I'm not even sure if they really are, because they don't squirm when a police officer walks by. That's the real reason I say that. But I think there's something else going on. But there's this knife at church that is just the most, and there's several of them. It's not just one. And if I have this in my hand a certain way, nobody would. Now, if I switched it in my hand, people would probably react differently. But there's this, it's funny because people can see the purpose of the object. It's not the object itself that's the problem. It's the it's the way it's used and the way that you conceive of it being used. Anyway, so
powers are
just like a magazine that holds 16 rounds instead of 11 or 10.
Because once you cross a certain number, it's made to kill people. Yeah,
and the knife I'm talking about was sharp. It was very sharp. It could have easily been used to kill 5 people before anybody could do anything about it.
Right. Yeah.
If you knew what you were doing, you could easily do that.
Yeah. It gets rather complicated when you're talking about artifacts, things that are made and can be used for different things. But at a basic level.
Well, we were talking about matches, so.
Yeah. So if you go down to like natural, more basic powers like ignitability or motive powers or something like that. In any case, what's weird is that you have a characteristic of something, a property of something defined by something else that need not ever happen or exist.
Yeah, right.
but it has the thing that you're talking about, the property has its identity based on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
When
So
I buy matches at the store, I make sure to tell the person at Walmart, these matches don't even have to be struck. And in fact, I'm not even planning on striking them.
Right.
And then they usually look at me like, this is going in my emergency kit. But they're still matches.
I think the opposite.
And they still have the potential
That's right.
not to
They
get
are
to a Thomas
combustible.
Aquinas on you. Are you Catholic?
Yes, I am.
No,
that story.
This is me talking to the Walmart person.
Oh, I
That's
thought
the
you were
dialogue.
interviewing me.
No, that's the dialogue. I was
see,
telling
see.
you the dialogue.
And what did they say?
They say that's a good idea to have extra matches, and
Hmm.
and then I go along.
They were afraid you might ignite them all.
No, I don't think so.
So we identify things. I mean, that's their identity based on
Right.
something else that doesn't exist. That's what seems weird and contemporaries are like trying to figure this out. But if you're Thomas, this is the heart of the idea of a power, that it is of the very nature of a power to aim at something else. And like, how is that? Because to be anything at all is to have reference to some ultimate cause. I mean, I'm really cutting out a lot here. I'm just cutting to the chase here. So everything has built-in purpose. It's aimed at something. It's first aimed to be fully what it is. So here you have the basis of virtue ethics, right? What is it to be a human being? Is to have a certain nature. And what is it to be a good human being? To fully actualize that nature, right? That the idea here is that there's purpose built into natures. But going back to what I said earlier, we think of causation as having its basis in this productive sort of power. But what Thomas says is you wouldn't even have that. You wouldn't even have efficient causation unless you had what he calls final causation, this built-in purpose. So it turns out that at the very bottom level of reality, you have intentionality, aiming at something greater and fuller. Right. And hey, that's
so reality is brimming with purpose.
Yeah, at the most basic level.
And you think that's true?
Yes.
Now, let me I feel like
if you don't say that, okay, here there's a few things to say. If you don't say that,
let's back up a bit.
All right.
Because I think what's tripping people up right now in the future, if they've gotten this far, is they're trying to conceive of what a PhD program in philosophy is. Like what you're talking about these people writing in 1960s. You're talking about some guy that lived. When did Thomas live?
He died in 1274.
Okay. So you're talking about 750 years. 700 years. Right? You're talking about a long time.
Yeah.
And philosophy's going on this whole time. And it's like, what do you do when you do a PhD in philosophy? In science, the idea is to refine what the last guy said and make sure we get it right. And then the next guy takes it and refines that. Is that what's happening in philosophy? Because that's what people might be mixed up. Is there an answer? How do you know what the right answer is?
Well, how do you know the right answer to anything? It depends on what you're trying to answer, right?
But if so many people disagree, right? There's so much disagreement.
I feel like we've had this conversation recently.
We got to have it again, because I guarantee you that's what people are thinking right now.
So disagreement the fact of disagreement does not imply that there's no reality, first of all.
Right.
That there's no answer. People say, there's no answer. What do they mean by that? It's kind of ambiguous. Are they saying there's no reality that answers to the concepts we're using? Most of the time they mean we can't figure it out. It's a lost cause. And there are some philosophers that think that.
Sure.
Actually.
Well, what's it like
But
doing a PhD in
disagreement, but the
philosophy?
fact that
Is there a lot of agreement?
inference doesn't, it's an illegitimate inference from the fact of disagreement.
Right.
That's just not, there's nothing about the fact of disagreement that implies that you can't know something. That
You obviously have to have enough agreement to get the people's signature on your
Right.
dissertation.
you also have to have enough agreement to, this goes back to an earlier point you made. I mean, if you're talking about something, you already have a target
Mhm.
of inquiry. If you have a concept that you understand at all, then you have some target of inquiry. So that's good. And a lot of the work is trying to refine that, because things get, I mean, what did
Do you think
Augustine say? He said, if you go
Do
ahead.
you think that that's what people agree with when you're doing a PhD in philosophy? Is that what lets it all hang together?
You know, you're asking a really good question. I think it sounds like to me you're asking the question, is philosophy a cohesive, progressing enterprise? And the answer,
Yeah.
and the answer is not a very easy one to give,
Mhm.
because nowadays, and I'd say for the last 100 years at least, there's not even a consensus on what it is to do philosophy. If you go look up in the Stanford Encyclopedia, as of now, I don't know, but I've done this before. If you go look up philosophy as an entry, you're not going to find it.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
That's, think about that for a second. The
I'm gonna check right now.
encyclopedia, yeah, you should check. Maybe they have one, but one they do have is metaphysics, and metaphysicians don't even agree on that. I mean, so that's a problem. So when you talk about philosophy, you can talk about a giant label, or you can talk about certain historical lines of inquiry or conversations, right?
Mhm.
So in scholastic philosophy, there's disagreement, but there's a consensus about the worldview.
Oh my gosh. Are you seeing this?
Yeah, I see it. And I'm sure anybody who views this would then too.
Well, I think most of our listeners, they just listen. They listen to on Apple Podcasts. They can't see what we're doing.
So we see Byzantine philosophy. I mean, look at all the numbers below. Like,
Well,
look
hold
at
on.
how many entries.
Tell them we're on Stanford
Latinx,
Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Lantinx. I don't think I've ever said this word out loud, but
I
Lantinx.
just searched the word philosophy. That's all I put in the search bar, in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and which is plato.stanford.edu. The first entry is Latinx philosophy, which is a brand new made up word in the last, probably, I don't know. It's definitely within my lifetime. It's probably in just during my teaching career, actually. The second one is experimental philosophy, then Japanese, then process. There's always something in front of the word.
There's always a
philosophy.
qualifier.
Yeah. There's not just the word philosophy. Well, how do you know what
I'm not an
philosophy
English
is?
major. I'm not an English major, but I would think that you can't qualify something that doesn't itself have
Very good.
some kind of definite
That's
meaning.
fascinating.
Yeah.
What is it that makes all these things philosophy? Philosophy of technology, Chinese philosophy, philosophy of education, philosophy of macroevolution, critical philosophy of race, Japanese Confucian philosophy, feminist philosophy of biology, philosophy of history. The word philosophy is never defined on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and thank you, Dr. Errin Clark, for pointing that out. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's also disturbing. It's actually really disturbing to me.
Well, there's a story to be told, and I tell it in my intro classes. I don't know if I do a great job at it, but I think it needs to be told, because there are times in history where it did have a definition.
Yeah. Well, what's the classic definition?
Right, the love of wisdom, philia, Sophia, two Greek words, Sophia meaning wisdom, philia meaning love. And that meant and that definition really comes about through Plato, because there were two major, in Western philosophy at least, two major groups of called philosophers at the time, called philosophers that were very different. Now they go by the names the pre-Socratics and the sophists. But it was Socrates who, in a sense, took what was right about pre-Socratic philosophy and was right about sophist philosophy and raised it up to what became a foundation for Western thought. And that was this idea that you can know truth. You can know truth. That's the very purpose of philosophy, to know the truth about things that matter most. And what Socrates said before he was executed was, I want to know what it is to be a good person. I want to know what goodness is. And you would have to kill me to stop me from seeking to know what goodness is, because what other point is there? If I can't be a good person, then why am I here? So, I mean, even he thought, to be a human is to aim at something, but we have a will. We can aim ourselves in different directions. And he wanted to aim himself in the right direction, that is the true direction, according to what is true. So this is something that I'm really, I think about a lot. It's really important to me. This idea of truth and goodness, or knowledge and goodness, cannot be separated. You can't be good without a certain kind of knowledge, but you can't even get that knowledge without being good in some way. And I suppose if there's anything I would like my students to think about, it's that Dallas Willard made the point that we care about being good. Tell somebody they're not a good person and see how they respond.
Yeah.
It's not going to be pretty.
Oh yeah, you're gonna.
Right. But then
that's why politics is the way it is.
Next sentence, they're saying it's up to you. Right? It's up to you. They at least they're professing this idea that you cannot be mistaken about it. And that's the thing. If there's anything I want my students to internalize, it's the idea that you can be mistaken about the things that matter most. You can be mistaken about what it is to be good and what it is to live a good life.
I think you just gave us the title. You just gave us the title of the episode. You can be mistaken about the things that matter most, with Dr. Errin Clark, Ph.D. Whenever I'm doing an episode, I always think of what's the title. Even if it's a wide-ranging discussion, the way the software works, they want you to title it something, and then the way it works when a viewer or a listener searches for what they're interested in listening to on their commute in traffic or where they're doing the laundry or whatever, I try to capture something that's true of the conversation, but oftentimes it's not quite the entire conversation, because that's an overproduced podcast. I think some podcasts do it, and you have to be really a kind of a control freak to do it that way. And some podcasts do. But in wide-ranging discussions like this, it can be a challenge to find the thread, but I think you just gave it to us. You can be mistaken. Say it one more time.
You can be mistaken about the things that matter most. I think I said severely mistaken, but you don't need to. It can be, make it simple, right?
Well, I usually go by the word count. I usually go right up to the end of the word count that they allow on YouTube, which is 100 characters. You can
when
be
I say that to
the
people
things that matter most.
When I say, and I think philosophy, simply defined, getting back to the definition, is thinking carefully about the things that matter most. If you want a very rough, but in any case, when I say we can be mistaken,
the definition of philosophy that you give.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it can be elaborated and
say more. Say it again. Say that definition of philosophy again.
Thinking carefully about the things that matter most. I mean, there's more to it than that. I think you need to include the idea of truth there. Seeking the truth of the things that matter most by thinking carefully about them. Something like that. there are lots of things we talked about that I feel like we didn't resolve.
Like what?
Well, so we were talking about, I think we were talking about, I was reading the New Testament. Maybe we resolved that, my dissertation, and it's fine with me if we don't resolve them. I feel like I have such a tendency to go off on tangents because I find many questions interesting. I hope I didn't start something and then not finish it. And
What thread would you
on the
like
perch.
to, why don't we start to try to resolve some of these things?
Okay. So what I wanted to say about powers and what Thomas says about powers is that, as we've said, purpose is inherent in everything at the most fundamental level. And
you think this is true?
I absolutely think it's
So
true.
in other words, this isn't just a history project. Thomas said that. Isn't that interesting?
It's not
Let's
one
put
little
that on
thing
the
after
shelf.
another. Yeah.
You're
And
saying
so I'm
that
glad you brought up
Thomas-
history.
Thomas is telling us the truth.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought up history because there's, as a contemporary philosopher, Alistair McIntyre pointed out, there's two ways of looking at history. One is just these things happening after another. And there's no valuation. There's no saying whether they're good or not. They just happen. You know the bumper sticker, right? But then there's another way of thinking about history, and it's about things getting better or getting worse, right? Now, you can only say that if there's some standard to measure that by, right? And if things themselves can aim at that standard.
Right.
That's the very idea of final causality in things. Things aim to be a certain way. And they are good in the sense that they achieve that aim. They're like a good knife. You brought up the idea of a knife. What is a knife? Well, we might define it as a cutting instrument, just to be rough. Well, how do you know what a good knife is? By knowing what sort of thing it is that contains an aim, a kind of function, as it's often called, the function of cutting. So a bad knife doesn't cut well. A good knife does cut well. You can't understand, at least in the Aristotelian and Thomistic
An
sense,
assault
you can't
weapon.
goodness. Right. Right. I mean, it comes that conversation
Well, I mean, if you use
would
it
be
to
helped
assault
out by some of
somebody,
the things.
that would be an
Right.
assault weapon.
That's right. Like a big knife that you use to cut cake with.
Why is that not an assault weapon? I don't understand. I never understand these definitions that people come up with, these terms.
In any case, to me, that just opens up the idea of things aiming, of intentionality is fundamental, and that opens up ethics and epistemology for me. It makes sense of a lot.
Give an example of what it makes sense in epistemology of.
Okay, so
Define epistemology.
I'm tempted to get into a hot button topic here.
Just define epistemology for us first.
Epistemology is the study of what it is we know, how we know. It's concerned with questions of knowledge and truth. It's literally the theory of knowledge. Episteme is the Greek word for knowledge or science. It's often translated. And ology, right, comes from logos, study of, discourse about. It's a realm of questions that have to do with knowledge and seeking the truth and having beliefs. Okay, so you could say those three things: belief, truth, and knowledge are the key topics in epistemology. Well, the way Thomas understands them is as certain powers, right? Knowledge, what knowledge is a habit. It is a disposition to believe the truth that comes about in a certain way. Right? It's not by accident. It's a natural disposition. So he would say, like, when you learn mathematics, you're building a certain habit in your mind. You're learning to see the world or some aspect of it in a certain way and building the habit to see it in that way and to notice it and to be aware of it in all of its detail. That's what it is to know something. And you have the kind of power that does that.
Mhm.
You have different powers that apprehend, that register somehow what reality is, and incorporate that into your being in a way.
Right.
So the senses encode what's out in reality in certain ways, and there's different kinds of encoding mechanisms, but the intellect itself grasps universals. And when you know something, when you have truth, there's a certain perfection of the power. And when you have knowledge, it's a habitual perfection. You're habituated in, so if you know math, you're habituated into seeing mathematical properties. If you know, if you're a specialist in art, you're habituated to see intricacies of shade and color and structure and stuff like that. You have a kind of knowledge.
Is that an internalist understanding of knowledge?
That is a
Justification?
great question. I've always wanted to hang on to internalism. And maybe we should say what that is. And people don't disagree about this, but my understanding of internalism is that you can be aware. I think in terms of reasons, you can be aware of the reasons of your belief, and they're and they're showing that your belief is worth holding, even that it's knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the time, but you can be. So must you be? I don't know if I'd go that far. I think we know things without some. I think, and Willard held this, and I had an interesting conversation, Dallas Willard again, in his office, that you can know things without believing them.
How many
because
discussions did you have with him?
Just one in person, more over emails and stuff, but one in
Okay.
person.
How
But
long
it was a
was
great
that?
discussion.
How long was that conversation?
Seemed
you
like
had
a
with him?
long time, because they were. I think there must have been times where we were silent for 5, maybe 10 minutes at a time, sitting there in silence. It was really interesting.
Until you just couldn't take it anymore, and you're just like, no, actually,
no,
until
no.
until he couldn't take it anymore. You just like, say something, say something,
It was-
Errin.
No, it was much calmer than that. We'd kind of answer a topic and then just sit and kind of think about it,
Yeah.
and then raise
Anybody
another
who
point.
knows who Dallas Willard is knows what I just said was so ridiculous. That's why it's funny. It's because it's so ridiculous. Because he was like the calmest guy. He could probably sit there for hours not saying anything, and be
I
happy,
loved
be
that.
fine
I
by
thought
that.
this so refreshing, because I'm a hardcore introvert, and sometimes I just get tired of talking. So
We can know
talked
things
about
without believing them.
Yeah, we can know things. Okay, and
Give an example of that. Do you believe that?
well, I don't know if I believe it. I think I do, because I've had an experience of, well, there's
we
a
can know
couple.
we can know things without believing them, but I don't believe that. But I do know that. Sorry, I
that's
couldn't
the
resist.
joke I was going to make. I know it's
I
irresistible.
could not resist.
I
Sorry.
started, but I feel like you should be the one to say something like that here.
Sorry, Dallas.
I've had experiences where I'm taking a test and I just feel strongly that it's the answer, but I feel like I have no internal.
Okay.
Right. But system, if you were to look at it, take a systematic look at the way that I wanted to answer, it seemed out of the bounds of the statistics that would allow it to be a guess, the statistical evidence. There's something called blind sight. Have you ever heard of this? Blind sight, where people think they're blind because they have no internal visual experience, but they discriminate things to a degree that it just is impossible that they aren't aware of them.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And this is more interesting, kind of scary. I don't know if you've had this experience, driving and then after 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, having no visual recollection of anything transpire, right? It's like you were on autopilot or some lower cognitive functioning that's just aware. I mean, you would probably swerve if a car swerved at you, but you're just spoken
like a true adjunct.
Yeah.
You know, I I wonder though, is that knowledge by, there's some kind of an ability or a habit?
So yeah,
There's a different
so I
sense
think
of
there's,
knowledge. Is that propositional knowledge? I don't know.
I don't think so. There is a distinction, Ernest Sosa, I know you know who that is, that he made that I thought was a good distinction. He talked about animal knowledge versus
Yeah.
philosophical knowledge of human law. I
Well, like
think
the
that's a
knowledge
good,
of how to
so,
ride a bike, for example.
right. Yeah.
I don't know that that's propositional. I mean, I think of driving the same way, where I get lost in thought as I'm driving, and
Yeah.
it's actually firearms are like that. I wish that we could get more people to have that kind of knowledge of firearms, the same level of comfort that they would in driving. There's so many sociological barriers to that because so many people have such an irrational fear of firearms. But it's have you ever been driving and suddenly become aware of how close to death you are and just how much you trust other people? I mean, like there are people that are inches away from you going the other
very
way.
mistrusting when I drive, actually.
Well,
I'm very
there are people that are
mistrusting when I
inches away
drive.
from you
And I-
going the other way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to trust to that extent.
And these
But
are
I've-
massive objects that have incredible destructive power, and yet
I
we're
know.
perfectly comfortable just in our own thoughts. But anyway, I that's how I am with firearms.
That scares me when I've been in my own thoughts.
I'm so comfortable with firearms and that I have the same level of comfort with that. But anyway, so what would you say an example is in ethics? You said that you can see this in ethics as well.
Well, I think it's the basis of ethics. The basis of ethics is being a good human being.
Okay. You
And
mentioned
being
virtue
a good-
ethics. Is that what you mean
Yeah.
by that?
Being a good human being means actualizing the fullness of what it is to be human, to think well, to act well in various situations. So there are virtues of the mind or intellectual virtues and virtues of character or moral virtues. And those are understood in terms of powers. You have the power, I have the power to move my arm. I have the power to speak and all sorts of other powers. But I can do that in a way, and I can be habituated to do that in a way that's beautiful and good and has value and approaches or enhances what is of most value. Now you need that's part of ethics. What is valuable? Where does value come from? But as far as having virtues and acting well, that is to be understood in terms of powers and habits. A habit is a kind of power that's natural and easy. So someone who is generous, it's easy for them to want to give to others or care for others. They do it happily, right?
Right.
They're not begrudgingly doing it. And that's so a virtue is basically a habit, which is a kind of power that is done easily. It's a habit that makes you excellent. That's what a virtue is.
Yeah.
And the moral rules are really derivative. It's the life, it's the goodness of the being that is primary. And then you can look at, okay, what does that kind of person do on a habitual basis? Right? What makes them excellent? Well, they have certain habits. They do certain things easily and with pleasure. That makes their life beautiful. Okay, what are those things? Well, now you have things like generosity, being generous, giving to this person, being kind, or whatever the sorts of rules we could formulate. And they're real. The rules are real, but they're grounded or they derive from what it is to be good. And that's understood in terms of power. Power.
Philosophy is interesting because you get to the class and you're supposed to read something. How do you know what to read in philosophy?
You're talking as a teacher or someone who's assigning?
I'm just talking
readings?
about philosophy. I mean, how do you know? You got to read, you got to start somewhere. How do you know where to start?
Well, I guess there's different ways to approach it. I think
Can
I'd
you
like to go to
can
the
you go
origins of
about it
things.
the wrong way?
Yeah, of course you can. You can read things. You can read very highly technical things that presuppose all kinds of background,
Mhm.
right?
That's the wrong way.
And you can.
What's a better way?
I think a good way to do it is to start. I think the best way to teach philosophy is, like you said earlier, to get someone to notice in themselves the questions they already have, and to start trying to make sense of those. And I think I think there's no better place to start than Plato. I mean, I just think when you read Plato, it's so natural. The questions come up so naturally, and you find yourself, I mean, this has been my experience as a teacher and as a student. You find yourself asking the questions with Plato.
Yeah.
And so I think the most important way to start philosophy is to get somebody to recognize in their own natural movements of thinking that they already care about these things. They already want to know these things. They already ask these questions.
So
And
there's
so
an
you
internal
just want to do it
motivation.
well. Yeah. There's an interior
You got
motivation.
to tap into that. If you don't, you will not be motivated enough to do the hard work that takes
I think so.
to do it well.
That's right.
Do you think that
And I see both.
Aristotle
I
was correct?
see both kinds of students. The students who don't at the beginning of my classes, if they tune out and they don't care,
Sure.
it's just going to be very difficult to get them to care later.
Do you think that Plato was correct, or Aristotle, where they disagreed about things? Aristotle was Plato's student. Turns out they were both huge figures in philosophy, and they had some disagreements.
So where do they disagree? One of the main disagreements is this idea of, I have to use some technical language here, subsisting universals or forms. That means Plato thought that forms are these universal, the Greek word is eidos. We get our word idea. So ideas, the very essences of things, I think that's the best way to think of them, existed independently. And Aristotle, it's hard to know how to interpret him in this regard, but we can say that what is universal is within the things. So if I have 5 chickens, what it is to be a chicken is somehow inherent into all of those particular things. Whereas
for which one?
For Aristotle, for Plato, it was a separate being. That's what subsisting means. It means it exists independently. Now, I know philosophers always give much more complicated answers to the questions, the simple question. Now, I think they're both onto something. I think that someone like Plotinus or the Neoplatonists brought together or gave something that satisfied both of their arguments. That there's a single, simple, infinite source of everything that is infinitely perfect. I know I was a little bit redundant there, but there's a single sustaining source of all reality that contains every possible perfection in an infinite way. And so everything, the reason you have universals is because everything that exists is some limited imitation of that. So in one sense, Plato was right, there's something subsisting, but it wasn't plural. It was single.
Okay.
And Aristotle's right to say that there's a universal, and how my interpretation of Aristotle is that there's not a single entity that's in all the particulars. It's just the particulars perfectly imitate, or they're perfectly similar in some way. I know that maybe J.P. Moreland would say I'm a moderate nominalist. I don't know if that fits, but Aristotle held that there's nothing, everything is particular in existence. Everything is particular. But in any case, this is what I just said, that there's a single transcendent, I didn't use that word, but you can include that, transcendent, sustaining source of all reality that contains within itself every possible perfection, every possible way of being in an infinite measure, is Thomas's view of God. St. Thomas.
What about ugliness? Is ugliness
ugliness
something
ugliness
that you can,
good? That's a great question, and that should be ugliness is not something positive in reality. It's a lack. So evil is, on this view, is always a lack of something. It's a falling short. But whatever, something can't be perfectly ugly. Something can't be perfectly bad.
Mhm.
It just falls short of what it ought to be. That's what evil is. It's something that falls short of what it ought to be. And by the way, that's
I said ugly.
definition
and
of
you
sin,
went to
right?
evil in 2.5 nanoseconds.
That's because the ugliness, beauty is a kind of goodness. Maybe I should have made that clear, but ugliness is a lack of beauty. But there's a more general answer, and that's that evil is a privation, a deprivation of a good that's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And the Neoplatonists said that, but
You
Augustine
surprised
was
me when you
famous
said
for
Plotinus had the answer. I didn't expect that. You to say
yeah,
that.
I think Aristotle and Plato left some unanswered questions, and I think Plotinus answers them. And people who say that Thomas is Aristotelian, I think he's more Neoplatonist if you want to put him in a merely philosophical category.
Wow, that's the first I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I had a boss at a Jesuit university I taught at for over a decade that was a Plotinus fan. His name is
Yeah.
Eric Pearl. He teaches at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles.
One of my most favorite passages or excerpts of a work is Plotinus's discourse, or his little he's kind of hard to read, he kind of meanders, but his discussion of beauty. I read it to my classes. To me, it's one of the most, and not just most enjoyable because of the ideas, but one of the most important things. It's
You're talking
not
about
beauty.
Did you say Plotinus?
Plotinus discussion of beauty.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
does it have any pictures in it?
It doesn't. It's intellectually beautiful. What she says is better than greater beauty than.
Okay. All right. I'll take your word for it.
Visual
Usually, if it
beauty.
doesn't have any pictures, I throw the book away, which is why I only have a couple
I knew that
copies of
about
the
you.
Bible left.
That's right.
I've got the Precious Moments Bible.
You need some children's Bibles.
So we have an idea of philosophy seems like if you're going to do a PhD in philosophy, you have to be convinced that you can find truth about something that's valuable. Otherwise, why would you spend all that time?
That was my motivation, and I would not have done it otherwise. It was what attracted me to philosophy.
Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
I mean,
about
when I came, sure, but let me say this: when I came to that thought, to me, that's one of the most joyous moments in my life.
Yeah.
When I thought I can know the truth about things that matter most. I mean, think about the denial of that.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
Do you think that John Greco has that view of philosophy?
You're asking me to critique philosophers? Well,
no,
I mean,
asking you to describe. I'm asking you to describe his view.
Oh, is that his view of philosophy? I don't
Yeah.
think he does have that view of philosophy. He might, and I might be mistaken. But I remember conversations with him, not ones that I was a participant in, but one I was an observer, where philosophy, and if he ever watches this, he's free to correct me, and I'm a fallible.
He probably won't.
Philosophy is useful to problem solve and to solve conceptual problems. And I always was told by everybody that learned I was a philosopher, I always was told that was the most useless thing I could do, and why would you ever do that? And
that's right.
Well, why? Well, the best things in life are useless. I mean, what's the use of friendship? Are you saying you want friendship because you can get you something?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I don't think that's why
if a person really does have that view of friendship, then what does that say about their friendships?
I think they don't understand what friendship is, or there's some sort of perversion.
You have to understand what it is. I mean, but I think there is a hardening of the heart when you want something and you're used to just thinking of it that way. Or there's a habit. It's a sloppy habit, maybe.
I said either they don't understand it, or there's a kind of perversion in the way they love things or value
that makes
things.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of business people sound like this. I'm not sure if that's how they really
My wife
are.
is really interested in psychology, and we always have conversations about whether insane people know or whether she's really interested in forensic anthropology.
Mhm.
And so she reads a lot about serial killers and tries to understand like what is her big question is, what is their moral culpability? And
Right.
it usually ends up having to do with a kind of knowledge or understanding whether they're culpable or not. But anyways,
I don't
so
know
I
why
think
anybody would want to kill
some
Cheerios.
people have they seem to be disconnected, and I
Right.
think often it's by their will or by their neglect, maybe not a direct willing, but by a kind of neglect.
I think that's what it is with business people. A lot of business people, when they're talking about networking, they talk about making friends, connections.
Right.
But people who use the term friend, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that's what you mean. That's
Now
not
it's a
what
verb. You
friend
can
is.
friend somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I
All
got
right. Well,
friended.
let me ask you about teaching. Let me ask you about teaching. So you've taught for a long time now. You've have quite a bit of experience. Looking back on your time getting your PhD in teaching, would you do it over again? Getting the PhD in philosophy?
You know what? I would. My initial motives were that I thought this is something I love,
Yeah.
and I would like to make money and make a living doing something I love. That hasn't turned out very well at all. But the
You still love
training
it though,
and
right?
the habits that I have and the philosophical ideas that I've encountered are foundational to the way I live. And I would never want to give that up. I mean, the way I raise my children, the way I try to interact with my wife, the way I try to treat other people, the way I think about my faith even, and try to think carefully about that.
So your
Is
PhD had a lot to do with the stuff that's most
Yeah.
important to you.
not just because it was a PhD, but maybe because of the way I want, the way I approached it. Like I really, this was I couldn't write about something I didn't feel like had deep importance, life importance.
So you would do it over again?
Yeah.
At least the
If that was
PhD
the only
part?
way to get, that was the only way to have this. It isn't the only way. Now, if you're saying, well, if you could do this and not have to get the PhD, it's hard to answer that question because there are so many events that have happened in my life now. Do
Yeah.
I ignore that and try to answer this in the abstract or not? I'm not sure how to answer that question.
How do you feel about higher education? Do you think
I
it's got
feel-
any hope at all? Or is it totally a lost cause?
The current structures, the current universities, I feel like are trying to have a history that comes from a kind of role in a certain kind of society that cannot be played right now. I know that was a little bit difficult. Let's say this: the role of the university in its original conception cannot be played in this society in general right now. It can't. What I think, but that doesn't mean we should get rid of universities. What we should have, I mean, look, you need to answer the broader question: what's going on in society right now? What's going on in Western thought and culture and life? The idea of building the kind of habits and understandings and a kind of interconnected understanding that makes you a good citizen is the idea of the liberal arts. It makes you a good person in that community. That role and that idea involves the idea of a certain, at least somewhat determinate idea of what it is to be a good community, right? And of course, what it is to be a good person. And that you don't have right now. You don't have that. That's why most of my students, I'd say most, if they ever do, it is extremely difficult to understand why they would ever have to take a philosophy philosophy class, like, what is the point of this? Because they're thinking like philosophy has to be useful, like the most important things are immediately useful. Now, I actually think philosophy is the most useful because it answers the most
I
fundamental
agree.
questions. Look, if you can't answer the most fundamental questions about your nature and existence and purpose, then the rest is, I mean, the rest lays on top of that. I mean, what you're going to think about the rest of it is going to be determined to some degree by that. And if you can't, and that's what makes the bottom questions about the existence of God and the meaning of life and all that stuff the most important sort of question there is. Right. And if you don't want to learn how to think carefully about that, then what are you saying about yourself? And I'm not blaming people in this necessarily. I'm just saying,
how does philosophy help us understand this? I think this is good.
well, first of all,
how
it
does
helps
philosophy help you think about that well? Like there's something it does. It sharpens you, right? When it's done right, when it's done well.
Well, there's several things you do in philosophy. One is it energizes what I think is one of the most fundamental qualities a person can have, one of the most fundamental virtues you can have, and that's the love of truth. Now, certain philosophical schools and approaches actually undermine that. But let's just stipulate that we're talking about philosophy in the way I defined it earlier, thinking carefully about the things that matter most.
Fair enough. That's the dominant. I think that's the dominant sense in history.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So doing, like, actually doing that, you see that it's hard, and there's something about doing something difficult that in a way makes you want it more, because you can, especially if you teach a student in a way that gives them little victories, right? They start to see that they have an ability to discover things and see it so clearly. They're like, they believe that they see it and that they know it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times students said to me, I see it now. Like, I didn't see that before and I see it now. Or it made me see the world in a way I didn't. And they're not just saying, now I like chocolate instead of vanilla. They're saying, I see things there that I never saw before. To me, that is the purpose. I mean, any education in general is about seeing, right? Habitually seeing the world for what it is and in the way it is. But of course, we're talking now about the questions that matter most. So how does it do that? It helps you see in a certain way by teaching you a kind of love for truth, an intellectual humility, a patience with something, right? You don't just judge it immediately. You try to be careful to see it clearly and not make assumptions, see how it's connected to something else.
Doesn't this presume that you have a lot of time?
You discriminate. Well,
How do people,
I mean, I do this.
How do people get the time to do this?
I don't know. I do it in the shower. So, but
Well,
anytime.
We are talking about someone who give his whole life to this. So you make time.
Well, look, my daughters they have piano and they have other things in their schoolwork and stuff, but it doesn't take lots of time. It's sure, you should devote energy and time to it. You ought to. I mean, look, whenever you do something, I mean, this is a kind of a cliche, but when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else, right? It's how you use your time as a trade-off. Well, then what are the more important things to use your time for? So use what time you can for this. Thinking, reading, talking to people.
Do you mind if I ask you a few?
You don't need a lot of time. You can think of, you can have little discussions. I mean, it just takes a little discussion sometimes.
If you have the right mentor, I would say if you have the right mentor, then you
really important.
You save a lot of time, because there are people that waste years of their life. Do you mind if I ask you a few rapid fire questions?
I'll try to give rapid fire answers. Is that the kind of answer
like yes or no kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure.
have never done this. I want to try this.
All right.
Some people do this. Do you believe in the Trinity?
Yes.
Do you believe Jesus was God?
Yes. And it is.
Is God. Okay. Do you believe that the Second Amendment is an important amendment to the Constitution?
Yes.
Do you believe that there's life after death?
Yes.
You're doing pretty good, man. You're doing pretty good. Okay, this is the one I really wanted to ask you, and you can embellish on this one. I've been wanting to ask you this question for about an hour. My question is, do you believe that there are demonic impulses in the history of philosophy, or demonic movements in the history of philosophy?
I think there are demonic movements in every area of human life, and so that includes philosophy. Yes, I think there are certain ideas that, if they weren't produced by demons, they're certainly useful to demons, because demons have purposes too. They want people to go to hell, and they want to destroy everything that God loves and has said is good. And whatever they can use to do that, whatever they can use, even good people, well-meaning people, they will do that.
The flip side of that coin is, do you believe that there are movements in the history of philosophy that have been used by God and are angelic?
Yeah.
For lack of a
Yes, I
better
do.
term. Okay.
Yes. And of course, there's a broader, I mean, that's entailed by the broad. I think everything is used by God for good, of course. That might sound platitudinous to someone who's,
Yeah.
read Romans 8:28 or something like that. But certainly,
Right.
it might be that you're asking for specific
non-demonic.
things that you could identify.
Non-demonic.
Yeah, I mean, this to
don't-
just get
I don't
to get
mean that
personal
God.
there,
Yeah.
I pray before I teach. I pray that everything I say will lead them to, even if I'm teaching on Marxism or whatever I happen to be teaching on, or if I'm teaching something that's a bit arcane, or whatever I just pray that whatever I say leads them closer to the most important truths, and the most important one is the truth about God. And whatever I say that doesn't do that somehow God would like diminish or wipe it from their memory, because I feel like I have a really serious responsibility, and I'm actually fearful of that sometimes, because I would never want to say something that would take somebody away from the truth of what's most important. And I'm sure I have. I mean, I don't doubt that I've not been,
Do you
I've
think
not
that's,
thought about.
Yeah. Do you think that that's the point of a good philosophy professor, to help students see the demonic in the history of philosophy and point them toward the movements and the positions that are true? I mean,
I think you ought to I think you ought to help students see what is true and what is false and what is evil and what is good, to see it, to recognize it as such. That's, I think, very important. I think that's central. The way in which you do that will have to differ depending on what kind of students you have.
can you give an example of a demonic movement in the history of philosophy?
I think, sure, people are going to be angry at me, but that's nothing new. I think existentialism is at the root of most of the bad things that we can, and the kind of existentialism that is what you might call anti-essentialist, that just dismisses the idea that there are natures and that there are real values.
Okay.
And basically says the only value is self-determination and self-fulfillment.
Do you include Kierkegaard in that?
No, I feel like I've taught a little bit about Kierkegaard. I feel like I don't understand Kierkegaard in general well enough to speak intelligently about Kierkegaard, but I do understand his, 3-stage dialectic. That's what I've mostly taught on, and I think he has some really good ideas. I think the general. There's something really important about the kind of existentialism that takes particularity as fundamentally important, and the particular person, like not like that moves away from abstractness and says you are a unique being, and your uniqueness needs to be taken into account philosophically. But I don't think Kierkegaard was the first one that said that. I think Augustine was like, I mean, look at the way Augustine writes. He writes as a narrative of his life, right? The Confessions is a lot of it is a narrative.
Right.
In my view, that the first Christian existentialist was Augustine, not Kierkegaard. That kind of existentialism, because it takes particularity as a philosophical topic,
Gotcha.
But I don't know. Kierkegaard did that. I think it's important.
Is there a helpful book?
But if you dismiss the idea of general knowledge, abstract knowledge, that's a mistake. Why would you? I mean, things are particular, but they have natures. There's universality to things. That's really important. That's not unimportant.
Is there a particular book on existentialism that you think gets it right for the most part? That's helpful?
I would start with the Confessions.
Okay. Secondary source?
I can't think of one.
Okay.
No.
Confessions is not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid.
I'm not a very. This is, maybe I should be embarrassed about this, but I often read primary source
stuff. Nothing to be embarrassed
about. But scholars should be aware of secondary source stuff, and then stuff I want to be a scholar about. I do read secondary sources, but if I want to know about Kierkegaard, I might read some background, but I really would just like to read Kierkegaard and have some guardrails of background stuff, but I won't read a lot of. So for stuff it's not part of my area of specialty. I feel like maybe I don't read enough, but I just haven't read a lot of secondary source stuff. I'd rather read, if I want to understand Marx, I would like to read Marx. If I want to understand Hegel, I've tried to read Hegel, and that's really difficult. I had to stick more to secondary stuff.
How do you find, if you're interested in getting into philosophy, at putting your big toe in it, and you want to avoid the demonic and you want to cling to what is good, but you don't know where to start? How do you find a mentor that would help you, point you in the right direction?
I feel like I'm not a very good person to ask. I've asked for mentors. I've prayed for mentors. And for some reason, God in his providence has withheld that from me. I feel like I haven't had many. I've wanted them very much, and I still want.
You don't think Stump was?
She was, in some ways, philosophically and professionally, and as a person in some way. But in a sense, I didn't seek her out. She
fell in your lap.
But I have sought out mentors.
Yeah.
And I've formed rapports with people that I really respect a lot. I remember at Biola, we used to go out to breakfast with Doug Guyvet. I enjoyed that so much, and I learned a lot just by having conversations from him. And so, don't be afraid to ask. Pray. If you are a praying person, pray for those. Pray for the good things that you want and need always. And seek. I think I've sought out mentorship. I think everybody should do that. I think that to me is one of the most if you reflect on it, one of the best things that you could do in life. Find
Yes,
someone who's
I
wise
agree.
and good and learn from them.
Find a mentor.
Yeah.
Dr. Clark, we thank you for your time and your energy and your thoughts and your expertise. We wonder, do you have hope for the future?
Yeah, I do. I have so like for the future of this country or this world. I mean, I believe that what the book of the Apocalypse, or also called Revelation, says is true. So that's not very pretty. But
depends on which chapter.
Ultimate good, yeah. But ultimate good comes about. So, I mean, I think what is a great source of joy, not fleeting happiness, but what is a deep, great, and abiding source of joy for me is knowing that things will be put to right.
Yeah.
When and how, I don't know. I think things can be put to right now in our families and in our communities. I think the idea we should have in our mind, and the aim, is to build culture, even if it's like enclaves in the midst of stuff that's falling apart. We need to build culture, and it starts in our families and our homes. A father or a wife, I'm sorry, a husband or wife, a father and a mother need to have the virtue of their children as their primary aim as parents. The virtue of the home and the virtue of their children, and one virtue in particular that I think about a lot is the virtue of courage, to stand up for what is right, to do it intelligently, and to build. We can build. You can, if you have knowledge and understanding, you can build, right?
Yeah, courage. That's a big one for
courage.
me. That's the key thing, I think. What are the names of your children? Do you want to say? Give them a shout out.
Sure. I have a picture. This is kind of taken a while ago, a couple of years ago. I don't know. It's kind of, there we go. So the oldest is Dara. We call her Iana. The second,
some of them have dark skin.
Yeah, they have dark skin. Oh, here's my wife is Brazilian, and
she's got dark skin.
Yeah. So we call ourselves a Mexican hot chocolate, kind of a mixture of so she's not Mexican. Maybe it should be a Brazilian hot chocolate. They don't really have a lot. So it's a funny, because the race question, we joke about the whole idea of race at the dinner table about this. Like, what race are you? Like, what kind of
looks like an integrated
what question
school.
What? Yeah,
right after Brown versus Ford.
The word race just falls apart in my family. So there's Dara. The second is Kalia. Then my first boy, that's Elias. Call him Eli. And then second boy, he's now 7. That's Isaac. And then that's Mary Grace. She's now 5. She was probably 3 or 2 in this. And then that's Ezra.
Wow. Beautiful family, man. Congratulations.
They're awesome.
That's so cool. That's awesome. They're going to hopefully enjoy having this shout out on this really long interview of your dad, their dad.
I'm actually very proud of them. They're very good-hearted. I mean,
they look good-hearted.
I know all parents feel that way, but man, they're smart. They teach me things. They're good. I mean, they'll correct me about, like, Dad, you don't want to talk that way, or you don't want to act that way, or, but in a way that's they care about being good, and there's a joy about it too. Like, they want to know truth. They want to be good. We go in the sounds. I know this will sound weird to a lot of people. We go in Target or something like that. They won't look at the pictures on magazines. They will cover their eyes or turn their heads. And I think, like, who does that? And it's not because I tell them to do that. I don't think I've ever told them to do that. They just do that because they know about the virtue of modesty and purity. And I'm not trying to brag or anything. I'm just saying it just makes me feel good that they've internalized this. Like, when they're out and they're not even with me. Like at school, I remember some teacher had something on YouTube and something somewhat filthy came up or something. That's not doesn't happen very often, does it? Anyways, but I remember,
It's out there.
they had like-minded friends, and everybody they wouldn't even give it a second. They instantly just was like this. And
Wow.
we need to build strong people. We need to have strong families and
Yeah.
build and be courageous about it and single-minded about it, I think.
Well, let me summarize what I've seen from you in this time. And I know you, so I'm biased, but what I've seen from you this time is that your PhD, your professional life has taught you some things that are disappointing to hear and experience. There's hope. You're not in despair, but your PhD was a key formative experience that was used of the Lord to help you discern truth from falsehood, ugliness from beauty, goodness from evil, and to help other people see that, which is tremendously valuable. And so I'm going to pray for you right now. Lord,
Okay.
we ask and we call on you to provide Errin and his beautiful family wonderful, wonderful sources of income that would sustain them in abundance for their natural lives and the lives of their kids. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Lucas. It's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much for inviting
Absolute,
me.
brother.
Well, I really am grateful to be here, and I'm so glad you invited me. I've enjoyed our conversation, every second of it, and I've enjoyed seeing all the good things you're doing. And I'm glad this podcast seems to be successful and gaining traction and gaining awareness. And
Thank you.
I pray for you, and I pray for it, and I wish you the best. And
Thank you.
Heather too.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We so far are not losing any listeners. We're only gaining as far as we can tell. But it has been an arduous journey, to say the least, but it's worth it.
Can you tell me a little bit about it? There's something I've had in the back of my mind. It's not ready yet, but I'm learning. I've won money by writing grant proposals, and I'm still learning how to do that. I'm learning how to do it better. And I've thought of the Republican professor in that regard. I'm not saying I can do anything right now, but I would love to have another conversation with you sometime about what you've tried and what you're looking for and what you need.
I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Okay, we'll sign off, Errin. It's been great.
All right. Do I need an official sign off, or is this
I'm just going to say goodbye.
Are we recording?